Good morning, everyone, and thanks very much for joining the UKDEA annual conference. A little bit different feel for this year as opposed to previous years. I fondly remember the event that a number of you may well have attended last year in May in London, where there was lots of networking beforehand, lots of chatting, lots of exchanging stories. But we'll try and make it as interactive as we can today for you. So my name's Simon Woodward. I'm the chairman of the UKDEA. Just a little bit of explanation as to how the conference will work today. We'll have a number of speakers joining the stage and presenting their different stories across the day. In the top right-hand corner of your screen, you'll see people, polls, questions, and chat. So if you want to see who's at the event, click people. We're not using polls today. If you'd like to ask speakers any questions, please put that in the questions tab at the top. So just click that. And if you'd just like to have a chat amongst yourselves, I've put one there to get everything started. Please just say hello and just chat amongst yourselves. So to kick off today, we've got the annual conference. Unlike previous years, in order to try and have a bit of focus, and because we appreciate we can't have one over a complete day, we've got one common theme flowing throughout the event, which will last nearly 4 hours, which is about using the planning system in its widest extent to deliver heat networks, before which we'll have a couple of keynote speeches from John Saunders, who will be talking to us about the new heat networks roadmap, and also Ken Honeysett giving us an update on Triple Point. So if you haven't come across us before, just a bit of an explanation about who we are. So we're a bit unusual. We're not a trade association. Trade was actually struck out of the constitution when we were formed, because we were largely formed by local authorities. We were formed 10 years ago. Great disappointment to me and other members is that this is our 10th anniversary, so we should be having a big anniversary and party bash tonight, but sadly not, because of obviously the pandemic, but that's where we are. So we started in 2010 with 6 founder members. We're now approaching 120 members, growing rapidly. And all major district energy schemes in the UK represented by us. On the right-hand side, you'll see a little diagram that just really sets out how the membership works. So at the core, full members are those people who own the schemes. As we say, they face the pains of the scheme every day. There will be investors, developers of the schemes, and right the outside sit the very important people who also operate in the sector, whether equipment suppliers, installers, contractors, or whether just interested LAs and developers. So that's how our membership is structured. In terms of what we offer, just one more slide before we move into the conference. So what we see that we do is we give people who join the association the tools and support that they need to work together and expand the scheme. I describe us as quite often as a chamber of commerce for the district energy sector. So it's about networking people together to work for the good of all. But we do offer a number of benefits to members. We publish a monthly journal. We've recently refreshed and relaunched that. You'll see some images on the right-hand side. That's usually a sort of a 40 to 50-page document we issue monthly, talking about everything going on in the world of district energy. We have the annual conference and AGM that we're holding next Thursday. We've also got a new relaunched website and a library on the website, help, advice, and support. And most importantly, we're a network of members working together to assist each other and as a voice for the sector. So today, as I mentioned, one key theme, that theme is planning. So we'll start off with John Saunders and Ken Honeysett setting the scene, give us some context from Bays and Triple Point. We'll then move on to Catherine Lawrence from Bevan Britain, who'll be talking about the national framework, an overview of planning. We'll get some interesting regional perspectives, London, Bristol and Plymouth, which I'm really looking forward to. A bit of talk about mechanisms from Leeds and also from the GLA about how we make sure that people connect to schemes. And then finally, finishing off with some very important ones, which are some actual experiences from local authorities who are out there in the thick of it doing it. Not to say that Bristol or Plymouth aren't, but just to give some other extra case studies from Waltham Forest, Haringey and Barking and Dagenham. And as I say, please chat amongst yourself in the chat. But if you'd like to ask speakers a question, please put that in the question tab. And what I'll be doing is I'll be selecting questions from the question tab at in the Q&A sessions and posing those to the speakers. So I appreciate using this piece of software. You can actually speak to the speakers, but there'll still be the opportunity for you to do that via the questions tab. So finally, that's myself. If you'd like to find out more, we'll be circulating these slides after the event. I'm Simon Woodward, Chairman of the UKDEA, and for those UKDEA members at the conference, appreciating this is open on a very wide basis, please don't forget to register for the AGM. It's on the 17th of December at 3:30 p.m. So that's enough for me. It's mainly about all of the speakers and what they've got to say. So Tom, if you'd like to pull down my slides and put John's up, I will invite John Saunders to come to the stage. So thanks very much indeed.
Great, thanks Simon, and very warm welcome to everyone that's joining us today. So I guess my role today is really to set the scene, set the context for the rest of the kind of excellent speaker lineup. So firstly, just an intro to me. Hi, John Saunders, Project Director for Heat Networks at the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. So I oversee kind of all things heat networks related within the department. And I'm going to try and talk you through, give you a little bit of kind of the strategic context, kind of why we think heat networks are so important, talk you through our heat networks transformation program, and then, given the theme of the day, taking a kind of broad view of planning, both in terms of the new build and I guess more of a kind of energy system planning perspective. So you'll be well familiar with with these slides. We talk about net zero 2050 an awful lot because that is the reason that we're supporting heat networks. We've made great inroads into decarbonisation of the power sector. Over the last 10 years or so, and actually we've I think got ahead of where we thought we might be. But there's clearly some big parts of the economy that we still need to address and tackle. One of the big blobs on the sort of top right of the graph is heating buildings, and our clean growth strategy, which we published back in 2017, talked about heat networks meeting a range of contributions towards that target, anywhere between 17 and 24%. There's clearly a number of ways that we talk about decarbonisation of heat, and we talk about hydrogen, we talk about heat pumps and electrification, low carbon gases, but also heat networks as a kind of running theme across all of those different pathways. So we think that heat networks are going to continue to contribute an affordable, clean, flexible energy solution, all the way out to 2050. In terms of what that means for shorter term targets, many of you have seen that we announced the level of nationally determined contributions that the UK is going to be signing up to, of 68% reduction by 2030 on 1990 levels. And this is all part of the Paris Agreement. But given the fact that we're now 12 months out from COP26, which we're hosting in Glasgow, actually, UK government wanting to be a leader, as it has been to date, in climate change and net zero, have set a really exciting and challenging target for us. So that kind of bottom right graph, which tries to look at the downward trajectory of carbon to meet net zero, that it's got a bit more exciting and a bit more challenging since then. You'll also have seen the Committee on Climate Change published at their report on Carbon Budget 6. So carbon budgets are the way that we take sort of 5-year periods out to 2050, so that we can make sure that we're on track and have policies in place that are appropriate at that time. And within that, I think there's some really interesting features around heat networks and new build. So this time round, climate assemblies were a critical part of that engagement session. And of those climate assemblies, 80% of them agreed that heat networks would play a vital role. I think it's really important because it's one thing kind of having a high level strategy, but to have people, businesses, trade associations, charities, all sorts of people coming together in those very powerful forums and saying, yes, we agree, this makes sense, I think is really important. They also talked about 100% of new build having energy efficiency and low carbon heating measures from 2025, and the low carbon heating measures being heat pumps and heat networks, which I think we'll hear more of over the course of today. And they still think that around a fifth of heat will be delivered via a heat network by 2050. So that all solidifies in our minds the important role that heat networks are going to play as part of this transition. So where are we now? Well, we're not quite at 20%. We're at 2%, and the top right shows a kind of sense of where heat networks have reached high levels of penetration. It's no surprise that there's plenty of conurbations and urban centres around the UK that have seen heat networks gain significant traction. We'll hear from Simon at the GLA later on today around the London story and all the great work that the GLA have done in embedding heat networks as part of new build. And if you can really squint, that blob to the right of the UK is the exploded version of London, which you can see has much higher penetrations of heat networks. So some of the strategic reasons we like heat networks is that they can unlock these very large scale, low carbon sources of heat that you just wouldn't do on a building level scale. Things like waste heat from industry, heat from rivers and mines, large energy from waste plants. They can interact with the energy system more effectively than individual buildings. So whether that's load shifting or large thermal storage, being able to respond to price and carbon signals in the market, all of those become much more effective at the kind of scale that we're talking about with a heat network. And there are some wider energy system benefits as well. So deploying a heat network, for example, if you're looking at heat pump at a building level solution versus a heat pump on a heat network, you could see something like a 60% reduction in the peak requirement, peak power requirement that you'd need to heat those homes through what are ostensibly the same decarbonisation pathway. And so, of course, that means less costs to the energy system. You're not having to reinvest in upgrading large portions of the power grid. And by accessing some of these large-scale sources of heat, actually they can be more effective. So the performance of a heat pump, an air source heat pump on a building versus a water source heat pump on a heat network can be quite sizable. So again, increased performance, less energy required to heat our homes and businesses. So we see heat networks as a fantastic opportunity in the UK, and we tell everyone that will listen about it. We think it's a big market, and to meet the kind of growth that we're expecting, we think that we're going to need somewhere between 20 and 30 billion to do this, and that's the kind of level of investment we need to see. And so to unlock that, we need, I think, a compelling case as to why to invest in the UK. So, to date, there's been kind of organic growth, and then that's led to our ability to actually make the case, to internally, to Treasury, to elsewhere in government, to say we agree that heat networks are going to play a vital role. We want them to do more sooner and put together a package of support. I won't talk through the numbers in the blue bit at the bottom because I suspect Ken, who's on next, will dive into those. But that's essentially the impact so far of our published projects under the Heat Network Investment Project, which has been running since 2018 and will continue through to 2021, 2022. But I was going to explore a little bit more about what happens next and think about what that looks like for the 2020s. So we've got something now that we're calling our Heat Networks Transformation Programme. And this is a number of projects that were at different stages of planning that we think actually, when brought together, give us a really compelling case for continuing that accelerated growth of heat networks in the UK to 2025. So just sort of unpackage that a little bit. We've got actually the final year of the Heat Network Investment Project, where we want to finish supporting all of the fantastic projects that we see in the pipeline. We've then got our Green Heat Network Fund, which was announced at the March budget, which is our 270 million capital support scheme to aid the transition from fossil fuels to low and zero carbon heat networks and start to make an even more meaningful contribution to 2050. We've gone out and consulted on that. That consultation is live, and that would be looking at kicking off in 2022 through to 2025, so a 3-year capital funding programme. Again, the main difference between the Heat Network Investment Project and the Green Heat Network Fund is where you're sourcing the heat from, and our expectation that you'll see large-scale heat pumps and other exciting generators come forward. In addition to that, we've had an ongoing piece of work looking at how we can ensure that all heat networks perform well. And we've got, I think, some legacy heat network schemes that are performing suboptimally. We've had a decent-sized piece of work over the last 2 years looking at some of the things that we could do to improve the performance of those, to ensure that actually there are some carbon savings. There are more benefits to the user. The cost of heat is more effective. But actually, a large part of it is removing the negativity around people that are having a bad experience. And whilst they're they are in the minority, actually they do have a loud voice, and rightfully so. So we want to try and bring in a heat network efficiency scheme to try and turn this body of work where we think we know the answers to how we can improve these schemes into actually having them improved. So that will be a small capital scheme. For some time now, we've recognised that actually, if we're on this kind of big growth pathway, an important part of that's going to be ensuring that we've got the skills, the capacity and capability in the market to be able to deliver heat networks to high quality, cost effectively. And as part of the transformation programme, we're seeking to bring in a long-term skills programme, again over a similar sort of time frame, which will be building on a report that we published, I guess almost 12 months ago now, which looked at what we could do more, how we could work through academies, through DFE, through the supply chain, to really bring in that wider base of skills to the market. And then finally, we've got our heat network regulations. So this is our opportunity to bring in something that is proportionate for the sector and to give some regulatory underpinning for all of our work throughout the 2020s. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with it, our regulation for heat networks is almost non-existent at the moment. But what we want to do is start to bring in regulations that look at improving the customer experience, that enshrine decarbonisation of heat in heat networks as part of that regulation, and also improve the investability through putting heat networks on a similar footing to other electricity and gas networks, kind of statutory undertakers. So the regulation will continue through the 2020s. The transformation programme I see as a kind of a shorter term piece to 2025. And then, well, what next? Well, actually, we've just announced our intent to consult on heat network zoning, ostensibly from 2025 onwards. But what we're looking to do here is to start to address this coordination, timing and certainty risk. So quite often we hear that we're just not sure whether buildings 5 to 10 are going to connect to the network. So actually we're just going to connect the first 5, and that's what we're going to design and invest in the heat network on the basis of. And so we see heat networks coming forward. they tend to be a bit slower, they tend to be a bit smaller because of that lack of certainty in the risk. So we want to try and provide some additional certainty around the types of buildings that would connect, when they'd connect, and have powers and enforcement and sufficient levers and triggers to ensure that they do connect in these kind of very low regrets areas from 2025 onwards. And I've talked a little bit about sort of regulated decarbonisation, which is in the sort of 2030s. So, kind of combination of all those things essentially starts to talk about our package of work throughout the 2020s. So I'll just do a quick whistle stop through these because I think these are going to be talked about in more detail as we go through the course of the day. But I guess just to set in context what we see as the kind of loads that are coming onto heat networks across our pipeline, the whole pipeline, about 20% of the load tends to be from new build, and so is directly influenced by the strength of planning policy. And the challenge of the conversations locally then flow down from that. And actually a number of projects are entirely new build, so they live or die by the ability for local actors to have those conversations and ensure the heat networks are connected. The remainder obviously are retrofit, and the majority of those fall into these kind of subcategories. So public sector, large non-domestic and multi-tenanted dwellings, so flats that might already have communal heating systems. So to ensure we stay on track to 2030 and out to 2050, I guess just to reinforce, we see an important role for new build and retrofit. We need to answer both parts of that. In terms of some of the work on new build, clearly working closely with MHCLG to make sure we've got a clear story to tell on gas combined heat and power, which is predominantly the technology that's come forward to date. Thinking about how we deal with existing networks that might be looking to expand will be really important. Ensuring that our standard assessment procedure, SAP, works for heat networks, and it's not always easy. It's a tool that's predominantly been designed for a building level rather than network solutions. So there's some kind of oddities that we need to make sure don't drive perverse outcomes. So some of the work we're doing there, recognising the value of waste heat, ensuring we've got ability to recognise enhanced performance of networks, and generally just feeding into a supportive planning policy. Then on the retrofit, I mentioned the zoning already, and that's really more of an energy system planning role, whether that's national, regional, or into the local, and making sure that it all kind of fits together and makes sense. I also just wanted to kind of flag that we do recognise that sometimes it can be challenging having conversations with developers, especially if looking to trade off a lot of different demands, whether that's affordable housing or green space or amenities, wider climate change and energy efficiency kind of requirements. And whilst we love heat networks, we don't think that heat networks are appropriate everywhere. And actually, we wanted to try and build a kind of common language between governments, between local authorities, developers, and others, to try and work out at an early stage whether having the argument about the heat network was the right thing to do for that particular development. So we've been progressing the development of a sort of an early screening tool for a little while now. Again, working with developers and other people in the market. I won't say too much about this. I suspect that I should probably send something around afterwards just to kind of outline what it is and what it does. But essentially, it looks to compare the upfront costs of a building level solution to a network solution and consider how those costs impact the different parties. So the developer and the customer, and make sure that things are kind of clearly articulated and communicated to all those parties, so people know what they're signing up to. And then finally, I thought, given the fact that I'd stepped through, what I see as our package of support in the 2020s, I'd also just kind of say, well, actually, what might it look like in the 2030 or in 2030? So, for me, there's been a shift to low carbon heat sources, and there's a clear trajectory for all heat networks to net zero. We have seen year-on-year growth. We've talked about 10% growth rate, and we'll see significant investment in the sector. And those networks are going to be larger, more strategic. I think all areas across England and Wales and Scotland where heat networks are most cost effective, that will have been established and clearly communicated, and they'll have started to be built out. That there are a variety of investors coming in because of this kind of changing risk profile and the size of the prize. That our supply chain has matured and our ability to kind of commission projects has matured. So we've got lots of different new people in the market. That actually some of those wider benefits of the energy system that I talked about being recognised and hopefully monetised, so that if your heat network's offering a system benefit, that you're getting paid for it. That all domestic customers are adequately protected, and those that aren't included in protections actually think they're getting a good deal with the quality of heat that they're receiving. And that we've got a set of common standards across all networks, so that if we do have individual networks, still coming forward, that they can connect and grow over time. So that was it from me. Try and set the context, but also talk about the kind of the planning and I guess the kind of energy system planning. These are our contact details. I'm talking today. Ken's talking today. And we've got some other people that, if you want to get in touch, then please do so. And I think that is it from me.
Indeed, John. That was a really good run through and gave the attendees an idea of how you see heat networks developing over the next few decades. And I can see some questions in the question boxes already, John. So if you can try and refrain from answering them by typing, if you don't mind waiting until we come back on to the actual Q&A session at the end. So if I could invite Ken to join me, Ken Honeysett from Triple Point, and Tom, if you don't mind putting Ken's media up. Okay, so I'll hand you over to the very capable hands of Ken Honeysett. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. Let's see if these capable hands can navigate the slide deck properly. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me this morning. It's a slight break from the planning theme of the rest of your morning. Simon had really kindly allowed me a few minutes to provide you with a delivery update for HNIP, for the Heat Network Investment Project. And somebody else is taking control of my slides. We've got demons in there. I need to go back to the beginning for you. So look, I'm not going to spend very much time telling you how to apply for funding this morning, or indeed how the scheme works. If that's interesting to you, and I really hope it is, please reach out to me directly or visit our website at the bottom of the slide there, www.tp-heatnetworks.org. So HNIP is a major government contract which will invest up to £320 million worth of capital funding in heat network projects in England and Wales. It's going to leverage in private capital too, but more on that a little later. Now, HNIP has demonstrably not been able to deliver the self-sustaining market that it was aiming for, at least not all by itself. We know already that follow-on funding in the shape of the Green Heat Network Fund will be arriving in 2022, and that the Prime Minister's plan for a green industrial revolution has been accompanied by a wall of financial stimulus packages already. We have, I think, irrefutably laid strong foundations though. We have fulfilled that first obligation to increase the volume of strategic, good quality networks. And we've seen steps, small steps though they may be, in the direction of an improved and eased supply chain as well. HNIP is gap funding. It provides grants and soft loans for both the commercialization and construction phases of a heat network development, and it makes those awards via quarterly competitions. When we talk about it being a gap, it's the gap that exists between an economically viable project, we define that as a project having an internal rate of return greater than zero, and a commercially viable project, a project that's able to bridge the gap to a level where it can be afforded and built out. We have grants, of course. We have also two loan types. We have a corporate loan, which is a loan we make to investment grade borrowers or the public sector. That carries an interest rate of just 0.01% per annum, so almost interest-free debt. We also have a project loan, which is non-recourse debt to special purpose vehicle companies or to sub-investment grade borrowers. That costs just 1% per annum. Both loans are available for repayment periods of up to 25 years. A little bit of an update on our funded projects, and you've seen some stats already. HNIP launched back in October 2018 at the start of what was then Green Great Britain Week, and we opened for funding a couple of months later in 2019. Since then, in the first 6 rounds, the first 6 quarterly funding competitions, we've been thrilled to award £125 million to 22 projects. We've done so in London, where I'm talking to you from, at Barking and Dagenham, at Meridian Waters, and at Veolia's Selchip facility. We've done so in the West Country. We've got 2 great schemes with Bristol City Council, from whom you'll hear a little later. We've done so in Wales, at sites at Cardiff and in Bridgend, and all across the north of England. I'm not allowed to have favourites, that's not the deal, but the mine water schemes at CM Garden Village and in Gateshead, which make use of our legacy coal mine workings to deliver carbonised heat, are super exciting. That they were being announced in the BBC while Roger Harriban, in the summer, while Roger Harriban from the BBC was reporting that it had been 2 months since we'd burned coal for energy here in the UK, was beautifully allegorical. John's previewed some of these. I'm going to get in trouble a little later because my numbers are a little higher than his, which makes me think we haven't given him an update, but at least we're trending in the right direction. We call this our numbers that matter slide. So when these projects get built out, our investee projects now, to whom we've made the £125 million worth of awards, that will have unlocked an aggregate capex of £337 million that will contribute to delivering 320 gigawatt hours of heat per annum to a little over 35,000 homes, as well as a number of businesses and public sector buildings. It will do so along an aggregate trench length now of 123 kilometres, and it will deliver, frankly, a pretty whopping close to 600,000 tonnes of CO2 over the first 15 years of operation of those projects. Now, if they're the numbers that matter, I think given the state we find ourselves in a COVID-ravaged country, these are probably the numbers that really matter. The Local Government Association and the Institute of Public Policy Research estimate that as many as 700,000 jobs could be created in the transition to a green economy. Better than that, they say that as many as 80,000 could be created in the district heating market alone. And we're seeing evidence of that now. Vital announced just last week that they're building a training and skills academy up in Blackburn. And we were thrilled when Leeds City Council, one of our first round success stories, told us that our funding had been an enabler of 430 new jobs already in the city, including 36 apprenticeships. All really brilliant stuff. And if driving local and national economic growth are a priority for the scheme, it's also true that it's vitally important that we inject capital and liquidity into the supply chain, the domestic supply chain in particular, firms like very many of you here today. All of our funded projects are described in detail on our website. It's the website URL that I mentioned to you earlier, tpheatnetworks.org. Do please go on there, have a read, have a look at some of the case studies, look at some of the great images that are up of these schemes that are already being built out. On that same website, you'll find some great resource. We have a really good knowledge bank being built up now. Lots of information for prospective applicants, information too on the sector, Hopefully you will find what you are looking for. If you don't, please reach out to me directly. Please go to one of our brilliant BDMs. I mentioned earlier that I wanted to touch on third-party investment because we think it's interesting. We think it takes us towards that self-sustaining market, but also because it's the bit of HNIP that is being delivered right here, literally today. You've heard John mention some of these numbers to you already, so I won't touch on them very much, except to say that it gives the context for why private capital is so very important. The Committee on Climate Change estimated that something like 42 terawatt hours of district heating could be deployed by 2030. That will take us from the 2 to 3% of delivered heat that John described today up to about 9% potentially. And that could rise to as much as 81 terawatt hours if we were to hit that magic 18% of total heat demand by 2050. Those clever sorts at the IPPR have been at it again. They reckon that to hit those milestones is going to take a capital investment of somewhere between 16.5 and 27 billion pounds. And in their white paper, Piping Hot, they specifically said that 22 billion pounds worth of private sector capital would be needed to be levered in if heat networks were to fulfill their potential. Of course, historically, and HNIP is a continuation of the fact that lots of this has been afforded by the public so far, but in this very wordy slide that I promise I'm not going to read out, I've tried to describe the fact that our public sector finances are in a pretty parlous state. VAT, business rates and corporation tax receipts are all at historic lows, while public sector net borrowing and public sector debt are at record highs. There was some great news in the recent spending review. The Chancellor lowered public works loan board debt rates, but increased the restrictions on how it may be used. And of course, PFI and PF2 have long been consigned to the history books. So there's a really compelling, obvious opportunity for private sector investors into the market. We know, though, that there are some hurdles to be overcome if we're going to be able to draw that in en masse. We chatted through at our investor conference just last week the fact that several of these hurdles exist. The really pleasing news is that already industry and government is putting the building blocks in place to see them overcome. In the building market framework consultation, Bayes highlighted 5 here that I picked out. They said it was a barrier to the engagement of investment, that there was a relatively low visibility of the market and the pipeline, that there was a financial burden and risk associated with particularly complex market arrangements, and a lack of standardized documentation and standardized delivery models. They said too that there was a perception that there was a limited understanding of costs and on ROI, return on investment. The sector may have had in some quarters a legacy poor reputation, and an issue that is familiar to very many of you, that risk associated with connection risk, the challenge of securing commitments from potential off-takers during lengthy project development phases. Well, as I say, really pleased to say lots of those are being overcome. Triple Point have already got a pipeline of something like 200 projects across the public and private sectors, and we've got the likely appointment of an experienced regulator that John described on a really near time horizon now. The sector is also being professionalised as well. Our colleagues in the delivery partner group, the legal firm LuxNova, have produced some templated sales, operations and maintenance contracts available to anyone developing a district heating scheme. We've already seen evidence of their use in the market, which is awesome. Their use means saving projects valuable time and, of course, lots of money on legal fees as well. More than that, though, their widespread use is a driver of the kind of standardization that is so attractive to investors. Within the delivery partner group, we've also developed a standardized due diligence set. That's a set that provides sponsors and developers with a better understanding of the due diligence requirements of investors and lenders alike. All positive stuff, I hope you agree, that's brought us to the point where we feel able, finally, to launch a funding framework with high levels of confidence in its likely success. We have now created and launched a new heat network funding framework. It's an ODU procured dynamic purchasing system that will attract, we hope, funders and investors with requisite levels of experience and appetite to bring heat network projects to fruition. It will have a broad range of funding available. There will be a senior debt, an equity lot, there will be an asset finance lot, and funders will be expected to demonstrate an ability to deliver services alongside that funding as well. And it's going to be available to all public sector sponsors and owners of heat networks. We think this is key to fulfilling that brief of the self-sustaining market. It provides a really efficient and proven way of the public sector to access private capital in a way that provides certainty of procurement. Certainty of procurement is super important to local authorities, also to investors in particular. It allows public sector bodies to engage funders to help structure and financially close projects as well. And as I said, the exciting news is that this is out now, today for the first time in ODU. We've called it Beehive. We love an acronym. It's the BEIS Heat Investment Vehicle. Out in ODU today, it appeared on ProContract just a couple of days ago. We've already got investors expressing an interest, which is brilliant because we're committed to onboarding very many of them in this fourth quarter of 2020. Yes, I know you're 9 days into your advent calendars already. We've set ourselves a lofty target of getting investors on in this calendar year and throughout the first quarter. But in that first quarter, in Q1 2021, certainly by the all-important financial year end in March, we wanted to be investment ready. We wanted to be transaction ready. And hope in that timeframe, we will see local authorities bringing projects to us for funding. It's complementary to HNIP, of course. It's the reason why the Triple Point team were engaged to arrange it. But we aspire, frankly, for this to go on and serve the sector in the very long term, if it's the success we hope it will be. You might think, in fact, you would be forgiven for thinking that the job of giving away free government money is an easy one. But let me tell you, my friends, it has kept me awake at night every now and again. As I'm coming to an end, I just thought I'd give you an idea of some of the challenges we're facing, which is to say, some of the challenges that we see our projects facing as well. We have the looming closure of the renewable heat incentive. That's a challenge for a number of other projects who have been developing up business plans over a number of time and are now expressing some nervousness about whether they will be able to benefit from those receipts. It's also creating a little bit of a break in the supply chain right now as people are rushing to prove out the efficacy of projects, to take them to financial close, to meet the deadlines of the RHI. If there is supply chain pressure there, then it is dwarfed by the challenges that everyone has had to face in the context of this terrible pandemic. There we've got particular supply chain pressure. There too, we've had real project delays. Not all bad news at all. As I've said at a couple of conferences recently, very many of our applicant schemes, including the ones that I've mentioned to you at Leeds, including two, Bristol, from whom you'll learn later, have actually made greater progress. They're ahead of time, precisely because of the pandemic, that roads have freed up and it's been easier to get construction processes started. So people's ability to keep calm and carry on never fails to impress. We are, you probably all will remember, leaving the EU. In fact, we go through the final transition phase at the end of this calendar year on 31st of December. Who knows where we will end up? One thing we think we know at the moment is that the state aid rules will change. Alok Sharma announced that we will be following World Trade Organization rules. HNIP is state aid, so we're wrestling at scheme level with what that means now. We are also trying to manage those budget pots we've described. We talk about HNIP being a £320 million fund. In actual fact, it's discrete funding available in the 3 budget years. We're moving into a phase from March 21 onwards, where we will have just the final year money to be deployed. There is still good availability of fiscal and non-fiscal funding, so grant and loan finance, but competition is undoubtedly getting higher. So the need to improve the quality of the applications is great. If any of you in the room are working on projects or working with potential applicants, do please talk to us, talk to our BDMs in particular. We know and have had it drummed into us that completing HNIP applications is a complex and time-consuming process. To engage with the team early is to give yourself the very best chance of success. More funding for heat networks is never a bad thing, given the extent of the task ahead of us, but apparently competing forms of government funding creates, or has the potential to create, some uncertainty. We've got projects from within our pipeline pausing and telling us that they think their interest might be better served by going for funding under the Public Sector Decarbonisation Scheme because of differing scheme rules. We have projects telling us that they might be interested in waiting to see what the Green Heat Network Fund has to offer. We understand that, we understand the predicament entirely. There is a clock ticking down to the HNIP scheme end, but there is a clock ticking down to 2052. What we don't want is projects to be delayed because of uncertainty of funding sources. So if anyone's got any doubts on the right source of funding, do please reach out to us, as I've said previously. Lastly, of course, but really excitingly, we're going to be wrestling too with the launch of Beehive, our funding framework. I mentioned to you that time is running out. I really meant it. We are now approaching the third year of the scheme. Those metrics that I mentioned to you earlier were from the first 6 funding rounds. We just had our investment committee in respect of a really good, well-subscribed funding round 7. Hopefully we'll be announcing the outcome of that in the new year. Round 8 closes for full applications in less than a month now, on the 4th of January, straight after the Christmas break. So if you can't face another turkey sandwich, do please put your mind to putting in an HNIP application for round 8. From that point onwards, while it's less than a year to go, at least until the final closing round for applications, round 11, the last round, closes full applications in October 21, that ahead of a full scheme closure in March 2022, with no prospect of an extension, I'm afraid. Simon's joined me, so I reckon I've got around a lot to say. There are short...
I did promise you just 10 minutes.
Sorry, Simon. Last slide then. If there are short-term challenges, there are definitively long-term wins. We are going to get this money spent, every penny of it, and draw in more from Beehive alongside it. It's going to be an awful lot of learnings as we grow our experience bank. We are going to deliver on those carbon savings. And really excitingly, we have seen and continue to see a real ignition of political interest in heat networks. Now, our Minister for State, Kwasi Kwarteng, has been tweeting for England about all the good works. We all, so Bays, of course, Triple Point, of course, but all of you and Simon and the association, about all the work that we're doing in developing our heat networks at pace. It is possibly, probably true that in time, a lot of our decarbonised heat will be derived from other technologies. But the Minister seems to know now that which we already know, that heat networks are the bit of the jigsaw that we can be getting on with today and must be getting on with today. And sorry, Simon, I'm all done.
No worries, Ken. Thank you very much indeed. I'll give you a solo clap there, because apologies, we're all working virtually. But no, you did a brilliant job of talking us through heat networks and the support that Triple Point were offering to those. So if I'll let you leave the stage and invite Catherine to come and join me, and Tom, if you don't mind putting Catherine's media up on the stage, then I will step off and let Catherine carry on with the presentation. So thanks very much indeed. Over to Catherine.
Good morning, everyone. So I'm a partner at Bevan Britton, and I deal with planning law and particularly work closely with our energy team. What I'm going to do today really is just set the scene in terms of the planning policy framework that's in place at the moment, and give a bit of a commentary on how that supports and perhaps hinders sometimes the development of district level heat networks. So just to set the scene, I thought I would start off by reminding everyone of how planning decisions are made. And the overriding principle is that planning applications should be determined in accordance with the development plan, unless there are material considerations that indicate otherwise. So in terms of the development plan, what is the local plan? Well, it's the documents, the development plan documents that the local authority has adopted that sets out its strategic and non-strategic planning priorities. And what it does really is allocate specific areas of land for specific types of land uses. Then within London, you've got the London Plan, which is the overall strategic plan for London, includes key policies which the local boroughs should conform to. So in London, you've got the separate local plans for the boroughs and then the London Plan as well. Then overarching that, you've got the National Planning Policy Framework, which was updated last in July 2018. And the purpose of this is really to set out the government's planning policies and objectives and how it expects those policies really to be reflected in local plans. And then supporting that is the planning practice guidance document. You may remember there used to be a lot of planning policy guidance documents, then planning policy statements, which really dealt with every aspect of planning that you could think of. And the planning practice guidance was issued really to consolidate all of that, and it's a very useful document to look at when you're preparing planning applications. It really takes you through step by step. And then at a local level as well, there are supplementary planning documents, and these are really designed to provide further guidance and clearer direction on policies in local plans, and it can go into quite granular detail. For instance, if there's a supplementary planning document on energy, for instance, it may really set out how the developers are supposed to deliver any energy requirements and how those should all be set out. So, as I've said, planning applications have to be determined in accordance with the development plan unless there are material considerations. And one of those could be where the overarching policies in the planning policy framework perhaps conflict with those in the local plan. Local plans can take often 7 years from starting through to being adopted, and so it can take some time for policies to work through and to reflect what is in the National Planning Policy Framework. So generally, if there is a conflict between the planning policy framework and local plans, then it should take precedence, but that's quite a complicated area, I would say. So in terms of when you get a planning decision, what might that comprise? You've got your decision notice, which will usually be subject to planning conditions. And the purpose of conditions really is to make unacceptable development acceptable, and any conditions that are imposed should be necessary, reasonable and relevant to the development. And they usually cover all sorts of things such as specific design details for that development, landscaping, highways matters, all sorts of things. And then you also may have a Section 106 agreement as well. And that, again, its purpose really is to set out obligations that will mitigate the impact of the development. And again, that can be a whole range of obligations. It can be contributions towards the delivery of infrastructure, actual obligations to deliver infrastructure, highways matters, and all sorts of things. And then sitting alongside that as well, there may be infrastructure agreements that have to be entered into. For instance, if you've got to do some works to the highway, you may need to enter into a Section 278 agreement to allow you to go onto the highway to carry out those works. Or there's also Electricity Act and Section 104 agreements under the Water Industry Act, which will deal with adoption of any drainage that might be required. So that's really just to give you an overview of the planning process, so to speak. So now I just wanted to turn really to where the planning policy support is for the delivery of energy and heat infrastructure. And that can be found in the National Planning Policy Framework document that I referred to. First of all, there's quite a general obligation in paragraph 24, and that requires local authorities to have strategic policies which really set out an overall strategy for the development of energy and heat infrastructure, and requires there to be sufficient provision for all types of infrastructure, but most importantly, including infrastructure for energy and heat. There's also more specific support at paragraph 151, and that paragraph says the policy should be there to help increase the use and supply of renewable and low carbon energy and heat. And plans really should identify opportunities for new developments to draw their energy supply from decentralised renewable or low carbon energy supply systems. So that's the overarching government support within the planning policy framework. I think many think there's perhaps not quite enough teeth in that to require developers to think about delivering energy and heat infrastructure in the developments. But I think the problem that local authorities often face and developers is often a question of viability and deliverability. So at a local level, many local authorities will have detailed policies which really attempt to introduce into their areas requirements for the delivery of district heat networks. Not all local authorities have done so. Sometimes, there are numerous hurdles as to why this hasn't been done, but there are many who are proactive, and I'll just run through a few who really approach this challenge in various different ways. I know several of the later speakers are going to touch on a lot of these schemes in more detail, so I won't cover it in huge detail, but just to give you a bit of a flavour. So in Stratford-on-Avon's core strategy, for instance, which is one of their development documents, they've designated specific district heating priority areas where new development is required to provide infrastructure for district heating. So if development comes forward in one of those priority areas, they are required to consider infrastructure for district heating. And then in Bristol, we've got, where I'm located, we've got heat priority areas within which developers are required to incorporate infrastructure for heat networks where it's technically and financially viable. And I know we're going to have a bit more of a presentation on that from Paul later on. Another approach as well is some authorities have identified, we just slipped on that. Some authorities have identified that schemes aren't really coming forward, so they've decided to take in the initiative, and in Leeds, where there was insufficient private sector funding for these schemes, they really earmarked public buildings and social housing to be the first anchor load of connections in the development of a city's heat network, really to kickstart the heat network in that city. Then in Addo District Council, they've got local plan policies which set out very clear expectations really as to how they expect new developments to connect into district heating networks. But they've also got a supplementary planning document, which I referred to those documents earlier, which really sets out very clearly the principles and also gives some guidance to developers about how they should best structure their approach to meeting those policies. Then, of course, within London, there's really quite clear requirements and policies within the London plan, particularly at policy 5.5, which requires 25% of heat and power to be delivered through localised, decentralised energy systems by 2025. So these policy requirements that I've discussed are often then secured within planning obligations and planning conditions, and these obligations are generally considered acceptable and do meet the test of being necessary, reasonable and relevant that I mentioned earlier. Generally, in terms of planning conditions and obligations, in relation to new developments, those requirements are secured through three main routes really. There may be a requirement to connect into an existing network if there is one. There may be commitments to connect into a future network, so really to future-proof the development. If a heat network should come through in the future, then that development should be ready to connect into it. Or the alternative really is an obligation requiring a contribution to the creation of a wider energy network in the future. I think those contributions are the least popular really, and the least successful, because the monies can sit in a pot with the local authority, and if the network doesn't come forward within a certain period of time, then there usually be obligations for those monies to be returned. So I think some real physical infrastructure is definitely the preferred way for local authorities. So in terms of the planning permission route, the actual installation of heat pipes in the ground for a heat network is classed as development, and so it does require planning permission. So the options really are to submit a planning application to get permission for that development, or to consider whether there might be any permitted development rights available. Some local authorities may have granted a development order that specifically relates to the infrastructure required for heat networks, so it's worth considering that. So in terms of the actual permitted development rights we've got at the moment, unfortunately there are no specific rights relating to the delivery of heat networks. There is Part 13 in the development order, which grants permitted development rights to statutory undertakers for the supply of water. And this is quite a technical argument, but it's one we've looked at recently. And this particular part grants rights to statutory undertakers, and we think there could be an argument that local authorities could be considered to be water undertakers because of various powers within the Water Act 1945 that goes back some way. So we do think there is an argument that authorities could potentially be construed as an undertaker concerned with the passage of water through pipes, but those rights would only relate to the laying of pipes in a street and wouldn't give the powers to go onto third party land. This argument, I have to say, is quite untested at the moment. So I think if you were looking to really utilise the rights within Part 13, you would have to discuss that with the planners and agree an approach. So overall, I think in most circumstances, you are going to have to look at getting planning permission unless there is a development order in place. But I think many in the industry really agree that really now is the time that we should have some permitted development rights available for the delivery of heat infrastructure generally. So as I've mentioned, some particularly proactive authorities have taken steps to simplify the process of getting planning permission, and they have adopted local development orders, which makes it that more straightforward. Usually there will be some prior approval requirements before you actually take the benefit of those rights, but it is particularly helpful. A couple of examples here is East Devon District Council quite recently, in July of this year, adopted a local development order, and that grants unified permitted development rights for underground pipes and cables and some minor above ground development, subject to some fairly minor approvals. And also Newham Council has also introduced a local development order for the purposes of the London Thames Gateway Heat Network. I know there is a section on I think there is a section on local development orders later, so I won't touch on that too detailed. I just wanted to mention this in passing. Actually, it's not strictly related to the topic that we've got today, but I just wanted to mention that where you need to get planning permission for works relating to district heat networks, you still may need to have to acquire rights on third-party land if infrastructure is going over land that's not owned by the local authority. And it's just to bear in mind that if you can't reach agreement with the landowners to acquire those rights, then you could look at exercising compulsory purchase powers, which are set out in section 13 of this piece of legislation. So that's really just an aside and perhaps something useful to be aware of. The last topic I just wanted to mention is the building regulations position, which potentially could be a bit of an issue in the future. Building regulations is changing, and the standard assessment procedure that sets out the methodology for determining property ratings is changing. And the process that's being introduced is likely to come in. It was supposed to be late 2020. I think that's now going to be next year. But the whole aim of it really is to align with the upcoming changes to building regulations Part L, which sets out quite detailed energy efficiency requirements. And the issue that we're starting to hear from our clients and within the industry is that the overarching objective of the current changes is to move towards the decarbonisation of the electricity grid. And the standard cogeneration approach to district heating would receive a carbon penalty under this new assessment regime. Unfortunately, the new regime doesn't treat site-generated electricity as favourably as it has been, which potentially could discourage the use of CHP and potentially undermine the operation of heat networks. We've certainly heard from some of our affordable housing clients that the heat network has historically led to some reduced tariffs for occupiers, and they are concerned about the reduction in these benefits, which could lead to fuel poverty. And they're also concerned about the viability of housing schemes. There's concern that some developers could be penalised by being required to connect to these housing schemes. So viability is a bit of an issue. So I think that's something to be aware of. So conclusions really, there is national and local planning policy framework to to assist in the delivery of heat networks and the heat infrastructure that's needed. As I've mentioned, I think many think there isn't really quite enough teeth in that framework to really require developers deliver. Obviously, it's different if you're a local authority who's looking to deliver their own scheme. The localised adoption of policies that really implement what's required at national level is a little bit patchy. Many local authorities are very proactive, but other local authorities, have significant hurdles to overcome, and so their policies are not always quite so helpful. But I think there is a real problem between translating what is at national level into local level and how to really get it implemented. There are planning permission hurdles, and I think it would be really helpful if there were some permitted development rights for this type of infrastructure to make the process that more streamlined. And lastly, as I've just mentioned, I think there is potentially a bit of an issue with the new building regulation issues that are coming forward. So I hope that was a helpful overview, really, of the planning policy framework and how that supports heat networks.
Brilliant. Thanks very much indeed, Catherine. That was really interesting. I was personally frantically scribbling down, although we'll all receive copies of your presentation, so I thought you raised some really interesting case studies as well that I hadn't personally come across. So, Tom, if you don't mind removing the media from the stage, and Ken and John, if you don't mind just rejoining me. I'm conscious we're already in classic conference fashion, running a few minutes behind schedule, which I'll ultimately blame completely on Ken, but there we go. So Ken and John, if you don't mind rejoining me. I can see Ken already taking the jibe in good faith. Take your venom out on those people you'll be dealing with next week when you've got your jury service, Ken.
It'll be my pleasure.
A few questions. So I think there's a really interesting one from John Sanderson. I don't know whether this best sits with Catherine or whether John wants to chip in. I like the fact, the question is, why is there such a disparity, Catherine? If you can see the questions in the questions at the side, why is something that appears to be set down by national government delivered in such a very differing way at local government? And I suppose adding to that question, do you think there's anything that could be done to make that less a disparity and less of differing levels? Is that something you feel you could answer, Catherine?
I think it's probably that the national planning policy framework guidance is really very broad. It really doesn't contain that many specifics for local authorities to then translate into their local policies. Local authorities are pretty much given a free rein, really, within the requirement to encourage the delivery of local heat infrastructure. Really, it's left to local authorities how they wish to translate that and how they wish to deliver that. And I think perhaps the guidance could be, more robust, more far-reaching, really, to give local authorities more of a steer, and to also perhaps give them a bit more teeth as well, because time and time again it comes down to deliverability and viability, and often it's very low in the pecking order. And I think if local authorities had a bit more teeth to really require developers to support it, it would be really helpful. Okay.
No, thanks very much indeed, Catherine. John, did you want to chip in on that? And also, I can see there's 3 questions specifically for you about HNIP Green Heat Network Fund, the role for CHP, which touches on the point Catherine's made, and also about the 2028 for future homes. So if you don't mind trying to pick up answers to those questions, I'd be most grateful, John.
Well, in that case, I'll probably leave Catherine and her response on the first one. Sort of important differences between HNIP and the Green Heat Network Fund. Well, the main one is the type of generation that it's supporting. So yeah, right now we've got probably 95% of heat networks driven by gas in some way, shape, or form, either gas boilers or gas combined heat and power. We're supporting plenty of gas CHP schemes in the heat network investment project, but actually the balance has shifted. It's probably around 50-50 between those and of heat pumps, energy from waste plants, the sort of lower carbon technologies. And the Green Heat Network Fund makes that next transition. So gas will be constrained to either kind of start-up plant or backup and peak plant. But the majority of heat would be provided via other technologies. So that's the main difference at the moment. We've been, our consultation's out at the moment. We've been managing something else, which is kind of where the funding goes into, and whether it goes into the generator, the distributor, or both. And we're still working through that through the consultation process. But broadly speaking, it's looking to do the same kind of stuff, which is support heat networks. It doesn't quite have the same kind of way of operating in terms of this kind of gap funding, idea that we came up with for HNIP. But there's more in the consultation document, but those are the kind of large differences.
Okay, and the CHP, the role of CHP in the short term for heat networks, John?
Yeah, so we continue to do more work with industry and with our trade associations to kind of have a definitive position on gas CHP, one that's reflective of a rapidly transforming energy system. So clearly we've seen decarbonisation of electricity happen sooner, so that the benefits of gas CHP from an environmental perspective have reduced. We think there's going to be a tipping point at some point where they're just not effective from a carbon perspective, although we recognise they're still effective from an economic perspective. There's a consultation planned. I think it's still slated for later this month, which sets out where we think those numbers have got to. Broadly speaking, I think gas CHP is going to continue to play a role in the short term. And actually, there's some really interesting models. I think there's one in Germany where actually they've started using carbon rather than kind of economic indicators to drive gas CHP. So constraining them to those times when they know the grid is dirtiest. And so there might be other options in terms of future ways of getting gas CHP operating in the most effective way from a carbon perspective.
Okay, no, thanks very much, John. And that final question, the proposed 2023 date for future homes, date change removed?
Yeah, so many of you may have seen something that was announced and then unannounced. Someone got the TIPEX out. Look, I don't know, and we've been talking about 2025 for a while now in terms of future home standard. Clearly there was the appetite to go faster sooner, but that was seemingly reined in at the last moment. So I think that's still in discussion across government in terms of the date it's going to be implemented. So I'm not part of those conversations. I'm afraid I'm not important enough.
I'm sure you are ready, John. You're certainly important enough in our sector. So, but thanks very much for answering those questions, and thanks to Ken, Catherine, and John for their very helpful presentations. So, if the three of you would like to leave the stage, thank you very much indeed, and thanks for your contribution. Anne-Marie,
Simon, could I just say, obviously planning issues are extremely complicated. So if anyone does have any queries, then please do come back to us or our energy team.
No, absolutely. The presentations will be circulated, and I personally will be coming back to you because I think there were some really interesting case studies that you've highlighted. So thanks very much indeed, Catherine. Really appreciate it. So Anne-Marie, if you don't mind joining me, and Tom. Oh, excellent. Well done. Nice and efficient. So I'll leave you, Anne-Marie, to crack on with your presentation. Thanks very much.
Great. Thanks, Simon. Hi, everyone. My name is Anne-Marie Robinson. I'm Principal Policy Officer in the GLA's Climate Mitigation Team, working on our carbon and energy policies for new build development, which set out in the London Plan. So today I'll talk through how we use the planning system to support heat network development. And just before that, I'll provide some of the wider context of our climate work that the heat networks planning policy fits into. So the Mayor has declared a climate emergency and wants London to be a net zero carbon city by 2030. We have a 1.5 degrees C climate action plan, which sets out the actions the Mayor will take to get us there, as well as the actions we need to see for a national government. Two of the key headlines from this work is the need for London to urgently increase the number of buildings being retrofitted with energy efficiency measures and facilitating a switch to low carbon heating, specifically heat pumps and heat networks. Decentralised energy, so renewables and district energy, is a really core component of decarbonising our energy supply. And we are aiming to increase this supply to 15% of London's energy demand by 2030, currently around 2%. So it's a really massive scaling up that we need to do there to achieve our net zero aims. We know that retrofitting our existing buildings is one of our biggest challenges in getting to net zero. It's not an area the Mayor has powers over, but we do have powers over new build developments. So it's important that we maximise these in support of our climate aims and make sure it's not adding to the already costly retrofit challenge that we've got. So we use the London Plan to set ambitious policy in line with our net zero target. This slide outlines the key elements from the new London Plan, which will be adopted shortly. We've got the extension of our net zero carbon target to all major developments, which is building on the existing net zero carbon homes target. And as part of that and our work to build on the net zero target, we're also introducing requirements for whole life cycle carbon assessments and post-construction energy monitoring. And there are guidance documents on those out at the moment, which are being consulted on. We have also introduced new energy efficiency targets to reduce energy demand as far as possible. And the new London Plan continues to promote and encourage low carbon heat networks and renewable technologies, such as heat pumps and solar PV. This is the London Plan energy hierarchy. So planning applicants are expected to meet our net zero carbon target, which is a minimum 35% carbon improvement on building regulations, with the remainder being offset. And they meet that target by following this hierarchy, which is set out in policy SI2 of the new London Plan. They must be lean, use less energy. They must be clean, supply energy efficiently. This is where district heating networks come in. And they must also be green, so use renewable energy before offsetting any carbon shortfall. And they do that by making a payment into the relevant borough's carbon offset fund. Be lean is really the most important aspect of this, to reduce demand as far as possible in the first place, before considering the most appropriate heat source for the site. And the new energy efficiency targets that we've introduced are really intended to support that. And we're already starting to see planning applicants respond to those targets and achieve higher energy efficiency savings. Be clean is where the carbon savings from connecting to heat networks are captured, and to establish the carbon savings that are achieved at this stage and what heat source is selected, planning applicants should follow the heating hierarchy set out in the London Plan. So this summarises the policy wording from SI3 of the new London Plan. It was very much drafted taking into account the need to start a shift away from gas as the electricity grid decarbonises, and to take into account air quality as well. So there is a much more focused role here for low emission CHP in light of that. So major developments in heat network priority areas. These are areas in London where heat density is sufficient for heat networks to provide a competitive solution for supplying heat to buildings and consumers. So major developments should select a heat source in line with this hierarchy if they're in one of these areas. So first of all, they're required to identify whether their site is in a heat network priority area and whether there is an existing or planned heat network in the vicinity that the development could connect to. So heat network connections for new developments really are prioritised and should be, we want to see they're fully investigated before moving further down the hierarchy. And if a network is planned in the area but not already in existence, then the development must demonstrate it is designed to connect to that network when it comes forward later on. My colleague Simon, who's presenting later on, will be covering that in some more detail. So if not, they then move down the hierarchy to point B, so using zero emission or local secondary heat sources in conjunction with a heat pump. And that really is to encourage use of secondary heat from environmental sources, whether that's air, water, ground, or waste sources, so heat from the tube, sewer systems, data centres. The next step, C, is for developments that are really large enough to facilitate an area-wide heat network, so in sort of the 1,000+ homes category. So in these cases, they can use low emission CHP, but only where there is a case for CHP to enable delivery of an area-wide heat network. So as I said, it's a much more focused role for CHP in this plan and in the new heating hierarchy. We do also expect applicants at this sort of scale to investigate opportunities to expand the heat network to supply heat to local developments and buildings outside their boundaries, if there is that potential for an area-wide network. And then the final element, point D, so this is use of ultra-low NOx gas boilers. We do want to see that other stages of the hierarchy have been ruled out first, but ultra-low NOx gas boilers may be suitable as an interim solution where a heat network is expected in the short to medium term, but is not available as soon as the development is built. So one of the tools we've developed to support planning applicants is the London Heat Map. So this is an online map developed in conjunction with London boroughs to identify where heat is used in the city and where heat networks could be located. It incorporates heat mapping studies from across the boroughs, and it's really designed to help developers and London boroughs create and locate networks. So applicants can use this to plot their site, identify whether they're in a heat network priority area and whether there are any networks nearby that they could connect to. And it's also a tool that can be used to identify how much of our existing building stock could be connected to new or existing networks, which is where we get real opportunities for carbon savings when we can connect existing buildings to those networks. So this slide is a screenshot of that tool. There are various layers on the left-hand side, which may be a bit small to see, but includes layering in terms of the heat map study areas, the heat network priority areas, and the air quality management areas. And this next slide just shows you, this is the layer for the heat network priority areas. So as you can see, those areas are pretty broad at the moment. We're looking at undertaking a piece of zoning work at the moment to refine these further and introduce more focused zones. So that will produce a new layer based on updated information from boroughs. We're at a fairly early stage of this, but I hope to have that available soon. And then finally, I wanted to outline the work we've been doing to support heat network decarbonisation plans. So since January 2019, we've been encouraging the use of updated SAP 10 emission factors in planning applications. This was in response to national building regulations using outdated carbon emission factors, which weren't reflective of the decarbonisation of the grid and therefore leading to higher carbon new development. So that wasn't a position we felt that we could justify. So we took the decision to take this approach until government updated building regulations with updated emission factors. However, we are continuing to allow the older SAP 2012 emission factors at sites that have potential to connect to a district heating network, which are typically gas engine CHP, because of the benefits district heating networks can have in terms of establishing a flexible energy system for managing demand, making more effective and efficient use of energy at scale, as well as their ability to make use of secondary energy or waste heat sources, and for decarbonising supply to multiple consumers, in particular those in existing less efficient buildings, as lower carbon heat sources come onto a network over time. So as part of this work, we sent letters to all the main heat network operators in London, requesting the submission of a decarbonisation plan, which would then allow us to accept SAP 2012 emission factors for any new sites that may be connecting to them. So this table here is just a high-level summary of what we're expecting to see from network operators. So we want to see a clear commitment to investigate all options for decarbonising the network, including the timings for that. We want to see evidence of studies to outline which options should be pursued, and also which funding sources have been investigated, whether that's HNIP or GLA funding through our new Local Energy Accelerator programme, which launched recently. And as we've heard earlier today, other funding sources coming forward, which is good to hear. We also want to see that monitoring and implementation plans have been included, and also a commitment to keep the GLA updated on progress so we can track the commitments that are set out in the plan and make sure they're being adhered to. So we've been in contact with 11 of the main heat network operators in London, which covers approximately 34 or so networks where new developments may be able to connect. Most of those are primarily gas engine CHP networks, and operators are examining opportunities to integrate waste heat sources, use technologies like heat pumps to bring emissions from those networks down. So this is an ongoing piece of work to really give assurance that any new buildings connecting in line with London Plan policy will be decarbonised in the future in line with our net zero carbon goals. So we have our SAP 10 approach in place until we see what updated building regulations and the new Part L looks like. This has been touched on already in previous presentations today, and our response to the government's consultation on the new Part L picked up on that concern that heat network connections weren't being actively encouraged through the plan and actually were being discouraged. So we're waiting like others for that to be published and for that response to come out, so we can then examine what that means for London Plan policies and how we'll respond to those changes in the new Part L. Okay, that was everything I was going to cover. Thank you very much for listening. Just on this final slide, I've included a few helpful links to our energy assessment guidance, which explains to planning applicants how to comply with our energy policies. There's a link to the heat map and a few other things there. So thanks very much.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Anne-Marie. That was a really good run through of what's happening in London and sort of set the scene for seeing what's going on in other parts of the country. So thanks very much indeed. So Paul Barker, if I don't mind coming onto the stage, and Tom, excellent, already done. And I will rapidly hand over to Paul to talk us through what Bristol's approach is to ensuring new developments connect to heat network.
Great, thanks, Simon. So good morning, everybody. My name is Paul Barker. I'm the Energy Infrastructure Manager for Bristol City Council. So I am not a planner. I'm on the development side of the council, and we're actually developing our own heat networks. And so that's where I'm coming from in terms of the discussion. So but basically going through a little bit of where we've got to ensuring new developments connect to our heat network. Okay, so just a very quick one about what we're doing. So you always have to have a slide with a picture of a district heating pipe being installed within it, and that's just the showing that we are actually installing heat networks district heating pipe at the moment within the city. We've got plans for that to be a decarbonised heat network. So the picture in the bottom left-hand corner is we recently received planning permission for a water source heat pump energy centre. So that's we're installing a 3 megawatt water source heat pump that will utilise the Bristol's floating harbour to provide zero carbon heat. And as you see from the slide, there's a number of heat networks that we're developing ultimately to connect into a citywide heat network. So talking about obviously my brief was around discussing how we ensure new developments connect to the heat network, and essentially we have and it's been previously picked up by Catherine. We have a planning policy. It dates back now. I can't believe it. I realise it's 2011, so it's nearly 10 years old. So it's actually getting a little bit long in the tooth. And certainly if we had the time again, we'd make some changes to it. But essentially, there's 3 areas that it requires. So there's ensuring energy efficiency with new developments. The other element is that there's a 20% reduction in CO2 from actually on-site renewable energy. And the other element, the key element, is the heat hierarchy. So very similar to the GLA. And what we've said, and this is the top red box there, is that within heat priority areas, major development will be expected to incorporate, where feasible, infrastructure for district heating, and will be expected to connect to existing systems where available. I think I'd like to strike out the where feasible myself, because obviously that does happen. We do get developers that do not want to connect to the heat network. They do find it a hassle, so they will try their darndest to get out of it. So certainly things that we would look to do if we had an opportunity to refresh our policies going forward. So as I said, we have a heat priority area. So this again, it's 10 years old. It's based on actually even earlier than that, some heat demand data that we had for the city, and that's the picture on the right there. So the orange area, the white area is the confines, is the city boundary. So actually, the heat priority area covers a large portion of the city, and actually that's quite good. I think as we move forward, we may look at reducing this and looking at where it's a heat network zone and possibly a individual zero carbon heat solution on buildings kind of zoning. So that's something we're looking at. But having it quite good, quite large, enables the council to look at those new developments and decide, yes, okay, this is what it's not an area that we are developing a heat network. It could well be in the future. So we would expect at least a district heating ready solution. But if it's an area that we think actually it's low density housing, it's unlikely to be an area that we will develop a heat network, then we'll allow them to move down the heat hierarchy and ideally provide a zero carbon heat solution on that development. And I think that's the great thing, albeit it does mean that there is a resource requirement for the council to have somebody or a team available to do that assessment. So we have a requirement to connect if there's a heat network available or proposed actually. And I'll come on to how we do that in a second. And as I said, if we think it's in an area that we're unlikely in the next sort of 5 to 10 years to develop a heat network, then we will say, yeah, okay, that's fine. You can be heat network ready. And essentially what we're pushing for is that is a communal heating system if it's a residential development. What we see a lot of, and no doubt other authorities do as well, is, especially for residential and student accommodation, is electric heating being promoted, because obviously for a developer that's very cheap. They're obviously not looking at the whole life cost and the cost to residents. And we've even seen social housing providers really pushing the electric heating route, direct electric resistive heating route. So we're very much pushing back on that, and have been actually quite successful in doing that. So I'd said that we have had very good success with actually ensuring new developments connect to the heat network. I think there's some key reasons for that. So for each planning application that's submitted, they would have to provide a sustainable energy strategy. That is then reviewed not by the planners, but actually by a small team who is a part of our sustainable city team. So they review those strategies. So they have a certain level of expertise to review those and provide advice to the planners. So it's not the planners having to be an energy expert. They've got somebody to lean on. And equally, because the heat network development team is within the city council as well, my team, is that we're able to both support the sustainable city team with their advice and also planners. So I mean, yesterday, for example, I was on a call with a developer who did not want to connect, to sort of push the rationale and to combat some of the regular questions we get about why we want them to connect to the heat network. So I think the other big bit of success is the fact that we use Section 106 agreements to ensure heat network connections more so than planning conditions, and that's what I'm going to come on to now. So before I start going through this, so we initially it was planning conditions that we generally that the planners would put on a development in terms of requirement to connect to the heat network. But actually, and interestingly, it was a developer who initially said, actually, I'd like it. Can we have it as part of a Section 106, please? And I think the reason why they wanted it in the Section 106 is it did then require the council to deliver the heat network to that site by a certain date. So it's almost a sort of contractual on both sides. And actually, we've used that now. It allows us for a much stronger requirement for developments to connect. And so within that Section 106, we say that they can't commence their development until a connection agreement is in place. So effectively, that they've signed up to a heat network connection. There's a contract in place with ourselves. And this is another key one, is that we want to see, it's ensuring the building heating system is installed in full compliance with the technical standards. So certainly with residential, we are expecting and we're reviewing their building heating systems to make sure they comply with the CIBSE code of practice, because we have seen in the past, and unfortunately we still see it now, very poor secondary heating systems that are either uninsulated, will overheat, and just poorly designed generally, oversized, all the issues that CIBSE code of practice, which is around the design of heat networks, including secondary networks, so the pipe within, so this is the pipe within buildings. We're seeing that, and that's what that is to address. So, and that's been very successful in us pushing decent design. It shouldn't be part of a planning requirement. Ideally, this is something that's picked up by building regs, but I feel this is a hole within building regs that until it gets filled, we need to step in on that one. So we also require them to be essentially to be ready to connect to the network, provide us with regular updates, and also vice versa. And it's partly, again, is that a development could receive planning permission, and we've seen some developments that between actual planning permission and actually starting on site is at least 5 years. By which time, if we'd have said, yeah, you don't need to connect to the heat network, there isn't one in the vicinity, actually by the time they're ready to commence the development, the heat network is in the ground and actually outside their door, as it were. So it allows us to, within the Section 106, that at key points, that they would come to us and say, right, is your heat network going to meet our delivery timescales? And if we say yes, then they will start progressing a heat network connection. If we say no, it's not looking like our heat network will be in that area by your required date, then we would allow them to go back to a district heating ready solution. So I think it's my final slide, which is the result of that. And this is the old market heat network. And I've just got some images here of the buildings that we've used the Section 106 successfully to enable them to connect to the heat network. So there's Castle Park View in the top left-hand corner. That's over about 400 individual PRS homes. And that's when we work very closely actually with the developer and their M&E consultants to design a really good CIBSE code of practice building. And actually we moved that from a 2 megawatt connection down to about a 1.2 megawatt connection, just through the fact that they were just over designing parts. So there are actually some savings to this for the developer. Yes, we have seen some real success, and we continue to use the Section 106. And I think a key thing is we've worked very hard with our planning officers to get their buy-in, and we're seeing the fruits of that labour now, as they are very happy and confident to push back when developers say they don't want to connect to the heat network. So I think that was my last slide. Yeah.
Thanks very much indeed, Paul. That was a really interesting presentation. I've personally got lots of questions, but I'll have to let you go off the stage for now, if you don't mind, and invite John Selman to come on the stage, and we'll invite you back at the end of John's presentation for a Q&A session. So hopefully, John, you're in the green room and can join us. Thanks very much indeed. Over to you, John.
Hello, thanks, Simon. Good morning, everyone. Just an introduction. I'm John Selman from the low carbon team in the City Council, and we get involved in delivery of schemes as well as commenting on planning applications and informing policy. So I won't repeat lots of similarities of the previous presentations, so I'll try not to repeat that, particularly bearing in mind in time. But I'll give you a brief overview. Obviously, the drivers for planning are carbon-led, but also, in our case, decentralised energy is a key policy hook for our planning policies. And obviously, national drivers, it's changing all the time, 68% by 2030. The Joint Local Plan, which is our adopted planning policy, adopted last year, beginning of last year, a long time in evolution, works to a particular time frame, and obviously that has a different carbon trajectory. And our climate emergency action plan or declaration, which was endorsed by full council early last year, again is different. And there's a bit of work to bring our joint local plan, review it and update it in line with our climate emergency action plan. And very similar to previous policies, our kind of policy in relation to carbon and decentralised energy refers to the energy hierarchy, refers to 20% targets against renewable energy, but district energy is a key part of our strategy. And the policy is DV32, but a part of that, sets out very specific, and we're very pleased to see quite strong wording around district energy requiring. We've had all sorts of previous challenges with previous, the predecessor, which is local development framework, in terms of with planning in examinations, really are chewing over the wording, but we're pleased that there's quite a robust wording in our current adopted policy, which is similar again, required to connect if there's an existing network, or be designed to connect if there's a future network planned in that area. And again, Section 106 contributions, we've had a lot of success in, particularly in the city centre, but also other areas in, agreeing off-site contributions in some cases. And the key thing about planning is that it does rely, we have to justify the planning policy, which is why, one of the questions was, why is there not a standardized policy across all local authorities? Every local authority has to produce its own plan, which works to a different time frame, usually because they're adopted at different times. But it has to be dependent on us providing an evidence base to support that, which is a locally derived evidence base. The economics vary across the country. And in our case, one of the key bits of evidence, and there were quite a few in terms of district energy, was our district's energy strategy, citywide strategy, which was carried out in 2017 based on heat mapping. Again, HNDU supported us in this, and that came up with this notion of district's energy opportunity areas, which in the plan you can see identify green, picking out some key heat sources, energy from waste plants, medical energy from waste plants in the north of Plymouth, our main energy from waste plant, over to the west in Barnbarton, currently supplying the dockyard with heat, but obviously capable of supplying a much bigger area of Plymouth. And so evidence base is a key part of the planning, and we also have to justify. We had to do a viability appraisal to demonstrate that it wasn't too onerous on developers. So there's lots of challenges in producing these, but we're quite happy with the results, and it is working, and we are getting some success and traction now. But obviously, that's still quite high level. So the supplementary planning document that underpins that, provides a lot more detail. It doesn't set policy, but it gives a lot of guidance, particularly in terms of district energy. So as well as those district energy opportunity areas, it also gives some criteria based characteristics where we'll expect developers to set out their approach to district energy. As we're planning, there's always two get-outs for developers which they can use, which is they can argue that it's not technically feasible. Obviously, we can challenge that, and also it's not financially viable to connect. So there are always in planning, wherever you are, those two get-outs. But one of the things that's we've found in the past, in terms of comments, is that planning can play a key role in helping to create the market certainty locally by having strong planning policies in place. I've heard that time and time again, and that's certainly, I think that's really key here, particularly with different timescales of different developments coming forward. It can create that local policy certainty for the market to develop. But the supplementary planning document also covers a lot of detail about CIPSE standards and what our expectations in terms of connection. Planning is not the only show in town, and as been mentioned before, future building regs are also going to create challenges to existing networks and create opportunities for new networks in terms of decarbonise. So existing heat networks reliant on gas CHP will struggle to connect new developments to achieve policy compliance with building regs. Building regs, we've always wrestled with building regs in terms of the relationship with planning. Building regs deals with individual buildings. It doesn't deal with collective building solutions, although it does give credits for connections to district energy. But it's something we do have to grapple with. And with SAP 10 coming in, again, I echo Paul Barker's comment. We've seen challenges with electric heating. We have fortunately put in our supplementary planning documents that we will not accept direct resistive heating. And that's for similar reasons. It's going to scupper our decarbonisation plans through electrification of heat and transportation. And we're working closely with Western Power to explore the impacts of heat pumps at scale. So moving to lower carbon solutions means that we do have to look at different approaches to heat networks, but also local opportunities, which will vary from city to city, as well as waste heat. Where are the renewable sources of heat going to come from? We're quite fortunate in Plymouth. We're surrounded by the sea. Again, I'm amazed. There's a lack of the fact that marine heat pumps, we've been looking at various European projects previously, talking to lots of coastal towns and cities, and marine heat pumps aren't really on the radar sufficiently, I don't think. I think they've got huge potential. But we're surrounded by the sea. There's also looking at the geology, sources of waste heat, and also air source. Particularly in the southwest, we have a very mild climate. Air source can work even better perhaps than some other parts of the country. And in terms of whether you're looking at fourth or fifth generation district energy, we've done a lot of work through our HeatNet project, European projects, as well as the excellent Celsius project, where really distinction between fourth and fifth is reducing the temperature, the operating temperatures of systems to use more waste or renewable energy. Fifth generation is really providing heating and cooling, a different system architecture. And I think from our evaluations of fifth generation, you need a sufficient cooling load, which we do have in our city centre, of 40% or more to make fifth generation work in a technical sense. So, fortunately, we do talk to lots of authorities. Paul Barker will recognise this, and we work with Bristol City Council to use their connections packs, but to update them in our context of what we were looking at in a fourth and fifth generation capacity, so that developers could be really clear about our expectations in terms of future-proofing or connection to these sorts of systems. And I think it's really important to be very clear to be able to get the results that we need on the ground. Fifth generation, as I say, we're looking at it in the city centre. It does have benefits. The fact that the weather patterns are changing, we're getting more heat waves, cooling demand will be increasing, possibly heating demand reducing. So it does give some flexibility, but also lots of other benefits in terms of air quality, etc. One of the challenges for us in negotiating solutions with fifth generation is the fact that it's decentralized solutions on a building by building. The equipment, the substations are on a building level as opposed to larger centralized equipment. And you need to think about the electricity supply in that context. So there are some challenges there, as well as opportunities. And to try to facilitate that approach, we talked about zoning, some questions about zoning as well. In our supplementary planning document, we do show a low temperature building zone to try to drive down those operating temperatures to 60 degree or below for low temperature in buildings, and ensure we've got the return temperature that's 20 or 30 degrees lower, to facilitate those sorts of solutions. And there's some extracts from our technical packs on the right hand side of the slide. And this is the last slide, you'll be pleased to hear, which sets out one of our networks that we're looking at, and in development. We put some infrastructure in already, is Mill Bay and Southern City Centre. As you can see, we're keen to get to the harbour side and deploy seawater, as well as been exploring ground source solutions with an underground aquifer under this part of Plymouth. So I think that's all from me. I'll hand back to Simon.
Brilliant. Thank you, John. If you don't mind staying on the stage, and if I could invite Anne-Marie and Paul to come back and join me, please. That would be very helpful. Brilliant. So we've got, I mean, I've got loads of questions, but I'm most conscious of time. But I think there's a really interesting question from Jodie. It's very familiar to see, which you can all read in the question. I think it's about you are all doing some really exciting things with heat networks, creating heat zones, heat network zones, using essentially the planning system. So it's about the future of heat network zoning, and whether it could create a separate carbon trajectory for the zone, removing specific building regs targets for new builds in that zone, and for how you kind of see heat network zones working in the future. Clearly, BEIS are consulting at the moment. So it'd be really interesting to hear what your thoughts are on what they should be doing, I suppose, for want of a better question. Who wants to go first? John? Oh, Paul put up his hand first. Go for it, Paul.
Okay, all right. Yeah, so I think heat network zoning covering both new and existing buildings is an absolute critical thing that has to happen. What we don't want to be doing is for heat networks to be developed just supplying new buildings and missing out the existing buildings on the same route. I mean, we're future-proofing our networks, so the design, so when those existing buildings connect, whether that's through requirements or mandated or incentivized, that heat network has the ability to supply all that. But I think that comes with costs, and that comes with us having to look quite strategically at our heat networks. So I think if we're expecting heat networks to be developed that are financially viable, that they need that sort of future knowledge that your future heat network connections to existing buildings are going to happen, and so I think it's absolutely fundamental. I think that the only thing is that I'd say is that with heat network zoning, that there needs to be quite a bit of work up front to make sure that the local authority areas there is sufficient work in terms of master planning and feasibility, and that also incorporates where the zero carbon heat is going to come from to deliver that. And I think once you've got those in place, then I think that's a key initial point. But yes, heat network zoning absolutely critical.
Okay, brilliant. John or Anne-Marie, would you like to add to that?
I'm happy just to say yes. I think the relationship between planning and building regs does need to be worked through. There's real opportunities there. Building regs only look at individual buildings, whether that's an individual house, not the whole collective solutions that planning is able to. But I think obviously building regs cover a whole raft of other aspects than Part L. So you can't totally negate the need for building control, building regs on a development. But I think certainly creating that local certainty and greater integration between the planning and the building regs requirements, particularly with future home standards, and I think is key to try to make this work. And I think zoning can play a key part in that.
Okay, brilliant. Anne-Marie, anything more to add from your perspective?
I'd certainly echo what Paul and John have said. I think it kind of picks up what John Saunders was saying earlier as well about, Part L and building regs being sort of, suitable at building level, but not so much at a systems level. And that's partly why in London we're looking at, refining our heat network priorities further, looking at zoning more. And we've kind of taken this sort of two-tier approach, or you'll forgive my use of the word tier, but in terms of using SAP 2012 and SAP 10 emission factors in conjunction at the moment. But I do think it's really important that the national building regulations really make sure that, new developments aren't, are still able to connect, are still able to meet building regs, and so that we've got that kind of consistency without having to kind of have the carve out that we're having to do in London at the moment.
Absolutely. And if you don't mind, if anybody'd like to pick up the baton, I did have one question from my side, because I think it was either John or Paul particularly talked about the level of resource required to put into doing this mapping, master planning, and then obviously enforcing zoning. So I wonder whether either of you had some thoughts on, the resource, and also where that's best to sit. If heat network zoning is brought in, which we all hope it is, where that best sits in. Is it something that sits under planning, or is it a separate part of the council function? Would either of you like to consider that question, or have I put you on the spot too much, Paul and John? Or Anne-Marie, if you'd like to jump in. But I think it was interesting because one of you did mention it's quite resource heavy. So yeah.
So I suppose in terms of my perspective, that it's working really well that we've got a dedicated resource with our sustainable city team that review the sustainable energy strategies for planning officers. I don't think that necessarily has to be at the local authority level, but I think there is that context around delivery of heat networks and understanding where they are going. So I think that if there needs to be something potentially within the planning team or a part of the council that supports that, but there needs to be then again an integration with who's actually developing the heat networks and has that strategic vision outside of planning that's delivering those heat networks and other sort of zero carbon heat, which is probably going to sit within the local authority. But I think that is quite an intense resource, and I think I do believe there's a need for at least a kind of national or a regional body that supports that. So you do get economies of scale rather than each authority kind of progressing their own sort of sustainable energy strategies independently. And I mean, take Bristol. We need we're looking at large heat main, a strategic heat main, big pipe that needs to run through an adjacent local authority, South Gloss Council. So it does need to have that kind of more kind of regional focus as well. Is important.
Okay, good, excellent. John or Anne-Marie, any thoughts on that question?
Yeah, I'm happy to I mean, yes, as I mentioned earlier, to back up planning policies, you need evidence, an evidence base, and I suppose that explains part of the difference. If you've got a well-resourced local authority, maybe larger local authority, they can provide that, or bring in the funding somehow, or attract funding to do that. With small authorities do struggle. And that's why I suppose there is this differential between local authorities and planning approaches, particularly in terms of district energy. So I suppose we've been quite successful in bringing in European funding and other funding, which to support that agenda too. But I think it's increasingly is quite hard to find the funding to support that. And I think I'd echo Paul's comment. If there is a source of funding to support local authorities to provide a sort of greater level of consistency across local authorities, as the conditions will vary, the economic and the opportunities will vary, and the sort of heat density will vary from different authorities, then I think that would be a very positive step forward.
Yeah, Anne-Marie, any sort of closing thoughts on that point, as somebody who sort of sits over a range of local authorities across London?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, resourcing is the biggest challenge that we hear coming through from boroughs, across all the policies that we're trying to implement. But I do think, there is a role for planners, both in the GLA, within boroughs, to sort of understand and be on board with what we're trying to do with heat networks. The more they can do that, the more successful these schemes are going to be, because as we know, the schemes that are successful involve everyone, whether that's the planners in the borough, your district heating teams, the network, the developer, everyone's sort of trying to work together to move these things forward. The planning reforms that were announced talked about resourcing a bit, but it was quite vague, quite high level. So at least there's recognition that more is needed. But yeah, certainly in this particular area, I think from what we hear from boroughs, heat networks is one area where the resource would be immensely helpful.
Yeah, no, absolutely, completely agree. Right, well, thanks very much indeed to all the speakers in that session. So Paul, Anne-Marie and John, I'll ask you to leave the stage and go and join John Saunders in the green room with the refreshments I've virtually sent to him. So thanks very much indeed. And hopefully we've got George Munson from Leeds City Council, who can now join me on the stage. Are you there, George? Excellent. Fabulous, George. I will hand over to George to talk us through local development orders, which is a very interesting thing that not many people are using. So over to you, George.
Thanks, Simon, and hi, everyone. Yes, I've been asked to talk a little bit about local development orders and how they are used in district heating. I feel a bit of a fraud. So I'm a district heating project manager. I'm certainly not a planner, but I think like Paul and some of the other speakers before, when we were looking at developing a district heating project for Leeds, we quickly realised that we needed to do a bit more work to create the right kind of conditions for district heating to flourish. And we identified that planning was both a kind of a barrier and an opportunity. So I will work through just a few points quite quickly today and try and leave some time for questions. So I'll provide just a little bit of background about our low carbon aims and how they're delivered through district heating. I'll talk a bit about our planning policy more generally to give you some context, talk about what an LDO is, why it's needed and how it's been developed locally, and then focus on how the LDOs help to deliver our scheme within Leeds Pipes, and reflect on some lessons learned on the LDO. So in terms of the background, this beautiful artist's impression of our energy from waste plant really kicked off a lot of our district heating work in the city. we've been talking about district heating probably for 10, 12 years or so, but without having a really clear sort of project opportunity to get politicians excited. So when we were undertaking a procurement for energy from waste plants, we worked hard with our politicians to just essentially sell a story that there was an opportunity to use our own waste as a feedstock to keep vulnerable people warm. And they really got that, and they saw energy from waste and having it district heating enabled as a key outcome of that procurement. As well as kind of that sort of political story, you can see that district heating had a really big part to play in terms of supporting economic growth, tackling air quality in certain areas of the city, promoting a circular economy, and more recently, really having a very key role to play in terms of CO2 reductions. But now that really is our key focus. There's a clear recognition in Leeds that we have to play our part in terms of the climate emergency. So we now have a strong commitment to being net zero by 2030, and decarbonising heat is one of the biggest challenges to achieving that, with district heating being a great opportunity in dense urban areas. But looking at planning, when we started doing our master planning for district heating in the city, we identified quickly that the potential was really extensive, that looking at just a couple of the key developments that were forecast at the time, 2 energy from waste plants to the east of the city, around the kind of city perimeter, we'd identified that there was a huge opportunity to develop a large district heating network. But if we were going to grasp that opportunity, we needed to create a stick to encourage developers to connect, and a carrot in terms of helping district heating companies to deliver district heating within the city. So we worked on some more detailed heat mapping, identified our opportunity areas, and then developed a hierarchical district heating policy, which is similar to some of the things you've heard from John and Paul, where at the top of the hierarchy, you connect to the network. At the very bottom, you make sure your development's at least district heating enabled. And that's been working well with particularly sort of more forward-thinking developers over the last few years. But one of the things that we also identified was that district heating was a bit of an anachronism in terms of utility providers. So we looked at an LDO in order to solve a particular problem. So an LDO is simply, it's a supplementary planning document, it's a local development order, and it grants planning permission for a specific activity subject to conditions. They're completely optional for councils to develop, and following consultation, they need Secretary of State approval. So we'd identified that district heating was a bit of an oddity. District heating companies and local authorities are not statutory undertakers. So unlike gas and electricity and fibre companies, we need to apply for planning permission for underground pipes. And even for fairly short pipe runs, it's quite a lengthy and expensive process. And it takes up planning time, and it's just not particularly controversial. So we thought LDO was a good opportunity to solve this particular problem related to district heating. So we worked on drafting an LDO, which essentially provides planning permission for a range of the smaller measures that you need to develop a district heating network. It doesn't provide planning permission for energy centres; they still need planning, and some of the larger above ground structures still need planning permission. But for the district heating network and all of the associated fibre and the like under the ground, that has all been has planning permission provided as long as the conditions are met. So in order to develop an LDO, just reflect on the process quickly. For planning, it's an incredibly quick and easy thing to do, which in kind of everyone else's eyes is quite a lengthy process. It took us between sort of 4 and 6 months to go from developing the idea of developing an LDO for district heating to having something approved by the Secretary of State. The process that we followed essentially was demonstrating a need that we then took to our planning board, which provided the justification for developing an LDO. We then did a large piece of mapping work to identify the specific parcels of land that we wanted to include within the LDO. So we mapped all of our own land, green spaces, the adopted highways, brownfield sites. We worked quite hard with some of the larger landowners in the city and some of our partners, so universities, hospitals, some trusts that own land to get permission to include their land as well. Produced the map that we've got on screen here, drafted up the terms of the LDO, the 9 specific conditions that would need to be met by anybody who wanted to use the LDO instead of planning, and then took it out to consultation. Consultation involved putting lamppost notices every 500 meters or so throughout the area covered by the LDO. So a couple of hundred notices need to be scattered around the area, and then writing to the statutory consultees. We had around 15 to 20 responses, broadly supportive. No one was objecting vehemently to the idea. Some points of clarity and some points of detail that needed to be tidied up in the LDO. We did that and then took it through our own executive board and then to the Secretary of State for adoption. As I said, that was all completed by March 2016, which then allowed us to go out to tender for our own district heating network. Safe in the knowledge that we could include within our works information that whoever we worked with would benefit from both the policy EN4, which requires developments to connect, and the LDO, which just makes it simpler to build the district heating network and extensions. So in terms of what that allowed us to achieve, it was a small part of the jigsaw that helped us to put around about £45 million into the Leeds Pipes network. It's been on the ground since late 2017. We've just completed construction of our phase 2 extension and have some HNIP support for a further extension to the South Bank. It's already around about 16 kilometres long. It's got 33 megawatts of backup boilers and at least 100 gigawatt hours of heat available from our energy from waste plants, which these pictures are of the built energy from waste plant, which I'm glad to say pretty much reflect the artist's impression of what it should look like. And then this is how it appears on the ground. So all of the orange lines are the first phase of the network that was constructed between 2017 and early 2019, and the dotted line is our phase 2, which was on the ground between September of 2019 and about September 2020, and so during lockdown. And the LDO just provided the planning permission for everything, all the pipes in the ground here. We had to apply for specific planning permission for the 2 energy centres and a couple of above ground sections of pipe. But other than that, it's simply a case of discharging the conditions of the LDO, which is far quicker, far cheaper all round than putting through formal planning applications. And then just reflecting on some of the lessons learned, I mean, it's fair to say that it was relatively resource intensive to establish the LDO, but it has been incredibly useful, both at a practical level for us to develop and deliver our own network, and as a statement that Leeds is an area that is open for district heating. So we're now engaging with some other potential district heating suppliers who are keen to work in Leeds, and it is one of the factors that's helped them to become attracted to Leeds as an area to invest in. We also identified that during the discharge of the conditions, that some of the conditions we put onto the LDO are just a little bit too demanding. So, for example, we have to have an ecological survey conducted, regardless of where the network runs. So if it runs down the middle of the highway, we still need to do an ecological survey. So that's something that we're looking to amend to make it more nuanced. We've also identified that the the terms of the LDO require special dispensation if we're within the curtilage of a listed building. And again, we could just simply be running down the middle of the highway. So that just needs to be amended. Also, we didn't include development sites, private development sites within the land that was included within the LDO. Because we had to seek permission from all landowners, we just couldn't do that with everywhere that we could imagine in the city. So we've identified that's a problem where we can get right up to the threshold of the development site, but still potentially need additional planning permissions to then connect into the site. So we need to find a way to add more land or buildings to the LDO once it's been adopted. So ours is now actually up for renewal in March 2021. So this is something they're just considering with our planners now about how to make the LDO more fit for purpose when it comes into its next iteration. But just to finish off, I think it's worth saying that this really shouldn't be needed. It's something that it's very bizarre that district heating has this special status, which makes it more difficult to develop than competing infrastructures. So I think as part of the regulation of the market, it's something that certainly should be considered, and district heating could be made a statutory undertaking just to take away these requirements. But I'll leave it there and hand back over to you, Simon.
Brilliant. No, thanks very much indeed, George, because LDAs are not something commonly practiced. So it's good to be able to peel back the veil on what Leeds have done. So if you don't mind stepping off the stage for a minute, I see we've already got some questions coming. Simon Wyke from the GLA, can I possibly invite you to pop on the stage, please, Simon, and rattle through your presentation, if you don't mind? I'm conscious we're a little bit behind time. Not your fault, Simon, at all, but that'd be great. Over to you, Simon.
Okay. Morning, everyone. Just to say, my name's Simon Wyke. I work at the Greater London Authority in the same team as Anne-Marie, who spoke to you earlier, climate change mitigation and energy, working on energy policy across London. So I'm going to talk to you, build on a few of the things that Anne-Marie said, and talk a little bit about some of the specific planning elements that we look at in London. I suppose one of the key things to remember as we're going through this is Anne-Marie also mentioned is that we, GLA being a regional authority, we've got 33 London boroughs, all working really hard to undertake this as well. So it's how we work with those London boroughs and support them to be able to deliver activity. I just wanted to pull this one up just for us to remember all the range of benefits that district energy offers, and I think it's really important for us to bear this in mind. It's not just about providing heat into buildings. It's about the district energy being an integral part of a future smart integrated energy system, and how can it support that. So whether or not that's increasing renewable energies in the mix, system balancing and flexibility, as well as decarbonising buildings, reducing primary energy demand, and the opportunity we've spoken about it already around using secondary heat and waste heat sources that allow us to reduce primary energy demand. Obviously also around addressing fuel poverty, improving air quality and things, and also obviously particularly pertinent at the moment is recovery and the opportunities that it offers for green recovery activity, jobs and things as well. Just a couple of things around as we mentioned, networks, they do need to be an integral part of that energy system. Anne-Marie mentioned our 1.5 action plan, with 4 scenarios all getting us to zero carbon there. All of those heat networks have got a really important part to play. So it shows us that that's a really important aspect, and just as using that tool, we reckon hopefully somewhere between 15 and 20% of London's heat demand might be able to be met by district energy over the long term. And just to reiterate, let's think about networks as part of that energy system and not just about supplying heat to buildings. And so I think we've heard it all the way through the talks, the opportunity that where they do offer greater opportunities to the energy system, then how might we be able to have a market structure that actually recompenses them financially for that and encourages networks to look at how they might be able to support the system and be rewarded for it. And then we've also talked a lot about this as well. Really important that as we're decarbonising buildings and districts, we've got to think about existing buildings as well as new development. So I know we're talking quite a lot about new development sort of here today, but for heat networks, if they're going to play the role they need to, we need to be connecting a lot of existing buildings, because that's where the majority of buildings are and the majority of emissions coming from. So it is about how we're able to ensure connection of existing buildings as well as new development. And Marie mentioned our sort of 15% sort of target for renewable and district energy to sort of to meet sort of London's energy demand. So that's one of the drivers that we've got for like sort of supporting district energy. And then sort of the London plan element, just sort of we'll be sort of picking up on that a little bit more. And we pick up that both at a strategic and a development level, and sort of what we're hoping to sort of be able to do there is sort of ensure policy supports a sort of a spatial approach to energy and sort of creates integrated solutions. So just quickly about sort of the strategic sort of spatial level, I think lots of other people have talked a lot about this, sort of about the role of sort of understanding where your heat demand is, where your opportunities for heat networks are, and then sort of thinking about how you're going to be able to realise those. It's really important. We've already sort of mentioned a little bit about zoning and things, and sort of we need to have done this kind of work to sort of understand where those opportunities for zones are, that will sort of then enable us to provide the evidence base for sort of designating sort of zones and things. So we've done sort of, we mentioned sort of energy master planning, heat mapping, and the London heat map allows us to sort of identify where those potential opportunities are. And this is a very active tool that sort of guides opportunities and sort of requirements around sort of planning, but also sort of around our wider decarbonisation work. And then obviously as part of that tool, also identifying renewable and waste heat sources, because as we said, heat networks are an integral part of getting to zero carbon. We need to be thinking about how we decarbonise our existing networks and create low carbon new networks, and sort of so it's really important that we understand where our potential sort of low carbon heat sources are as we sort of start thinking about network development. And then just thinking a little bit about sort of development level, sort of we've mentioned sort of the energy hierarchy, heating hierarchy, and our sort of London plan that sort of supports district energy as a important sort of solution for meeting the energy requirements of developments. Sort of we prioritise connection to existing or planned networks, again in a similar kind of way to sort of other cities that are sort of already presented. So what we'll be looking for from developments when they're sort of coming forward as part of that planning application, sort of a demonstration that they're sort of that they are like sort of they've engaged actively with the local network to sort of and prioritised connection. A commitment to a communal heat network, which basically allows that connection to happen. Obviously sort of things like sort of minimizing number of energy centers sort of to create that communal system, and providing a single point of connection for the network. And then we've also picked up on other things as well sort of during the course of the conference so far. Really important from a consumer perspective, consumer confidence and things, to have like sort of high quality sort of commitment to customer protection and standards of service, sort of utilizing sort of things like heat trust. Obviously as regulation comes through, then that will sort of ensure that like sort of communities are sort of protected and providing with good quality service. Also sort of high design standards, again sort of been mentioned before, but really important that we ensure that sort of there's high design standards to enable those developments to sort of to operate. Again, we'll sort of look at this sort of code of practice. Also we've got a heat network manual in London that we sort of produced as well. So again, that, and also we see some of our network operators actually having their own design standards and specifications so that they're able to work with developers to spec that out. Yeah, just to sort of, it goes into sort of a little bit more detail around sort of the three areas. Anne-Marie earlier mentioned that we've got sort of heat network priority areas and things, and we sort of use those to sort of highlight where networks we would look to establish networks, and we'd look for connections to those networks. Obviously in areas where we've got a network, then as I mentioned, sort of we expect connections to sort of prioritize connection to that network. Where we've got established plans for a network and those are coming forward, again, we would expect a communal site-wide network with prioritized connection to that network. Occasionally, we've heard sort of from Paul and sort of earlier that sort of there's sometimes a sort of a slight sort of time gap between sort of maybe when those developments require connection and when the network might come forward and things. So sort of where there is sort of a gap there, we sort of obviously expect sort of developers and network operators to sort of work together and agree an approach to ensure that like sort of heat is available as required, and sort of if required, then we're going to have a sort of a temporary heat solution that enables that to happen, and then subsequent connection. And just sort of some of the sort of ways that sort of those agreements might happen, that might be a number of years after occupation, once that heat demand to the development has sort of grown to a sufficient level, or it might be a particular date when the network's expected to come past the development, or otherwise sort of a number of buildings as part of it, where you see large scale developments with multiple phasing. Then also, so we do have areas where there aren't sort of well-established plans at the moment. Sort of those are happening in certain areas, but sort of not all the sort of networks have got well-established plans sort of currently. So in those areas where those are happening but aren't sort of currently sort of close to going into delivery, we'll sort of again look for a communal network, sort of basically sort of with a sort of safeguarded single point of connection, again enabling future-proofing that development for connection to that network as expected to arrive. Then obviously we talked a lot about sort of developers and sort of what we sort of expect of developers. Obviously sort of the other side is actually sort of what we expect of heat network operators. Sort of, and this is like sort of a really sort of important sort of two-way relationship, sort of network operators sort of with regulation coming forward and things. We've sort of heard about it sort of earlier, that sort of they're sort of incorporated within like sort of treated similar way as other utilities and things, so energy, electricity and gas. So sort of it's about sort of having them being really proactive within areas where they've got networks, and engaging with those new developments and supporting them as they sort of develop out. So again, that will be supporting with sort of design and specification to optimize performance, expecting them to sort of develop sort of best practice design standards, spoken about it before, and that sort of commitment to sort of consumer protection. So sort of currently sort of using things like heat trusts to sort of, because that's really important about building confidence within the sector, and sort of when we're thinking about sort of things like zoning and expanding networks, sort of having consumers aware of networks and sort of aware that networks are sort of a good solution for providing heat, sort of that helps us to be able to sort of ensure that we'll be able to encourage connections in the future. Oh, and sort of Anne-Marie spoke about it sort of earlier, so I haven't sort of mentioned, but really important for us is that a decarbonisation roadmap for our network operators, sort of because they're an integral part of us getting to net zero. So sort of it's fundamental that we recognise that a lot of networks are predicated on gas-fired CHP currently, but what we need to be able to work with them on and sort of to provide confidence for developments, for citizens and things, is that there's a clear strategy for how we're going to get to zero carbon. And then also sort of just to say that we emphasize really just the fact that we want those network operators to think about energy systems and the role they can play in that, and they're sort of not just around providing heat to developments, but thinking about how they can support the wider energy system. And then so this is my last slide, just sort of in summary really, just to sort of say that it's really important to remember that networks have got a really important role to play. They need to be working within the energy system and thinking about themselves as an integral part of that system and an integral part of getting to net zero. Sort of our London plan supports activity both at a spatial level, so that we sort of understand the sort of spatial planning for heat networks and the role they can play in the energy system, but also at a development level, what we expect from developments to be able to sort of prioritise connection to networks and support the growth and expansion of the networks. Also sort of important to think about both new and existing developments, and sort of as we sort of move towards a sort of a more zoned approach to heat networks, then it will be essential that we've got sort of both new and existing developments sort of being connected. And yep, and that's all from me. Thanks, Owen.
Simon, thanks very much indeed. If you don't mind just staying there for a second, Simon. George, would you mind rejoining us, please? Hi, George. Oh, lovely. Hi. So, in terms of questions, I think I've got certainly one for Simon, but let's go ahead with the one from Sam in the questions for you, George. I don't know whether you've managed to pick it up. So it's LDOs helping in any way with highways approval for disruption or diversions?
Yeah, so I think that's a step too far for LDOs, unfortunately. I mean, the LDO is very specifically related to planning permission, and in terms of kind of practical steps, the highways permissions, it's from my experience, it's so well tied into, or so closely tied into what else is happening around the city, that they would never be able to do this through planning. They need to know precisely when you plan to be in any one street and how you'll manage the diversions and how you'll get out of that street. It's done through a different statutory route, so the section 171s or section 50s. So yeah, you still have to keep working with those highways authorities, Sam.
Okay, and just in terms of the LDO, because I've heard things for and against LDOs, George, that it will provide permission if you take a pipe down a particular route, but if you try to change that route and delivery, then it falls outside the LDO?
No, so the LDO is different to planning permission. So I think it's probably the other way around, where you'd get planning permission to go down a particular route and then would have to vary the planning permission if you then go to choose to go a different route. Whereas the LDO, by defining all the land that's covered within the LDO, which includes all the adopted highways, as long as you're sticking within that land, then you've got that kind of broad coverage of the permission from the LDO. You clearly need to make sure that the conditions are still met. So if there's a condition around ecology, for example, and you plan to go off highway and through a woodland, you'd need to make sure that was dealt with. But if you're switching from one road to another, then I think it's beneficial compared to planning permission.
Okay. No, interesting, because it's not a widely practiced tool, is it? It's
No, I don't think there's many authorities that have gone down this route, and it's one of those. It's a real kind of marginal gain, but we just felt that there's something that would just help to make it a little bit easier and to help show that we're open for district heating. It was worth going down that particular route.
Okay. No, that's brilliant. And Simon, whether you've got any thoughts on LDOs being used in London, and also going back to an earlier question, particularly if you don't mind, just about your thoughts on the very different levels of engagement that you get from authorities across London, and whether there's a way of resolving those very different levels of engagement, because there's some people, some local authorities within London, I'd say, are most probably on the sort of, on the fast track and engaged, and some on the slower track, and just what your thoughts are on that, really, and how that issue is addressed moving forward, Simon.
Yeah, sort of on the LDO question, sort of sounds really interesting. So George, thanks very much for sort of a rundown on that. We sort of have had a thought about it sort of previously and things, but I think sort of maybe sort of George's like sort of last side said, should they be actually needed, and whether or not, and I suppose that sort of thinking about it at a London level as well, as I mentioned, we've got 33 local authorities, so that would certainly need to be sort of undertaken at a London borough level, as opposed to sort of a London level. We could work with boroughs on that, but sort of we've heard a bit about sort of zoning and the opportunity sort of maybe coming forward from that. So it might be that actually sort of with zoning and coming forward, that actually sort of the need for an LDO sort of maybe isn't as required as it sort of maybe would have been sort of earlier. So I mean, we've gone down a road of sort of using sort of a lot of sort of our heat network priority areas to highlight that, and sort of we've done mapping and like sort of energy master planning to identify opportunities. So I suppose they do a similar kind of thing, but I think it's sort of really interesting, and but probably I'm not sure that we will on that. As for yeah, I mean, obviously sort of all local authorities have got sort of different priorities, sort of different challenges, and sort of district energy isn't something that is a statutory duty for local authorities. So I think the important thing is sort of local authorities are sort of able to sort of are supported to do what they will. And if you look across London, some parts of London have got greater opportunities for heat networks than other parts of London. And I think sort of where we see sort of local authorities sort of doing a lot of work are those ones where sort of there are some sort of really good sort of opportunities that to be able to sort of support and sort of deliver out sort of heat networks and things as well. So sort of, but I mean, we sort of provide as much support as we can to sort of support sort of local authorities in that. But sort of it's just heat networks are sort of one of a number of things sort of within the sort of the planning authority that sort of need to be looked at.
Okay, all right, no worries. Thanks very much. I'm conscious of time, although we've still got 3/4 an hour left. So George and Simon, thank you very much indeed for your contributions. Really, really good. Getting some good feedback in the chat. So we'll ask you to step back into that virtual green room again and enjoy those virtual snacks. Now I'd like to invite onto the stage Carolyn Seymour from London Borough of Waltham Forest to make a presentation on really the experience that Waltham Forest has had. So these next series of presentations are much more about that sort of local level specific case studies and how local authorities have particularly used the planning system to create district energy network. So over to yourself, Karen. Thanks very much indeed.
Hi everybody, I'm Carolyn Seymour from the London Borough of Waltham Forest. I am the sustainability lead for the council, but based in the regeneration team, and I work very closely with the planners. So it's a sort of a blended approach. And our approach is slightly different in that we're not actually the energy provider or the energy supplier. So we've been working very actively with developers in different parts of the borough. So I'll just quickly show you through our main development that's up and running and showcase some others as well. So for those of you who don't know, Waltham Forest is in northeast London. You can see us there with the green dot. And we've been working for a very long time with both the GLA and BEIS and predecessors in terms of getting and accessing all the support to be able to move these things forward. So it's been a long journey, but one that we're now starting to see fruition at the other end. We're a predominantly residential borough. But we do have a growing business economy, so a lot of our developments are predicated on residential redevelopment, and we have some very strong and tough targets moving forward where we want to focus on sustainable growth within the context of a climate emergency, which we have also declared, and we have a high target of 18,000 new homes in the draft new local plan. So a lot of work to do and working very much with the strong development community that we have. So looking at this first development that we have been working on, you can see we started looking at this in 2011 and we identified 5 potential heat clusters. This was with GLA DEPDU, Decentralized Energy Program Delivery Unit support. And so we developed we identified the 5 clusters here working through that study, and the one that we're going to focus on is Black Horse Lane South, as it ended up being called. So the graphic that you've got there is looking at the sort of final feasibility, very high level feasibility in terms of heat loads, etc., that the DEPDU support helped us with. And then we went through another series of iterations looking in more and more detail. So you can see we went through this in 2012, 2014 and 2015. Also to say that we did have, as I'm sure most authorities do, we do have policies in our local plan, which was adopted in 2012. So it's called DM11, which is about connection to decentralized energy, and it's looking at that using the GLA heat network hierarchy. So moving into a little bit more detail, we also had an area action plan. So again, looking at what other tools we had within the planning framework. So this was adopted in 2015. And we had a specific policy within that, BHL 13, which was looking at decentralized energy, because we were conscious that there was the opportunity here with a cluster of sites that were next to each other, and we wanted to sort of push as far as we could in helping facilitate that network. So looking in more detail at the actual cluster of sites themselves, that you can see there that we have got the site at the top, Taylor Wimpey were the main developers there, and they actually looked at offering an enlarged energy centre and were the first developer to actually come forward. And over the 4 or 5 sites you can see here, there's over 2,000 new homes planned, and most of the sites are actually on site construction at the moment, if anybody knows that area. So the Taylor Wimpey Energy Centre was hosted there, and what we were looking at, they had also procured a private energy supply company. And so what the GLA team and I did with external advisors was to actually work very hard with the developers to make sure across all the different sites that they were able and confident to connect. So what we did was joint partnership working was key to this. So we, with the external advisor support, we actually developed what we called a term sheet to make sure with the ESCO that there was actually a fair offer being made to the other developers. Because remember that there are actually advantages for the developers in terms of not having to have their own plant space. And so what we were trying to do was help the developers through that process. We also had very strong support from our planning development management function. So again, I was running workshops and bringing people up to speed in terms of how that work could be delivered through the planning session. And we had regular developer landowner meetings. We were meeting quarterly. It was dealing with highway works and how everyone had to work together, because I think, as we all know, developers don't usually like being reliant on other people, but because these sites are so tight, that's what had to happen in this case. And it's been a very good process that the developers have all appreciated. And as I said, they're almost all on site now. So what we've been doing is using the planning tools to be able to encourage the other developers to connect. So we did, like has been discussed before, we had Section 106 wording, and we actively were getting involved in sort of stepping slightly beyond the planning process in terms of the hand-holding. I think one learning point, as I've shown in the blue box, is that you need to think about collaboration agreement and step-in rights. Because this is a private-led network, we don't actually have any of the contracts or any contractual situation ourselves. So what the developers are doing together is looking at how they can actually make sure that if things did change, either in terms of the energy supply company or in terms of the host for the enlarged energy centre, that they would still be able to supply all these new residents with heat and hot water. And where we've seen it ourselves is that we are sort of doing due diligence and looking out for the new residents and making sure that their situation is covered and a fair deal for them. Just quickly to finish off, because I'm also conscious of time, we are working in other energy networks within the borough. So the council itself has, working with a development partner, is delivering the Marlow Road regeneration project, which for the Bays is called Wood Street South. So that's just over 440 new homes with retail units. We asked for an oversized energy centre in the council's actual tender with the development partner. And so it's included within the development agreement that we actually signed with that development partner. And that picture there with people pointing at big CHP gas boilers, that is actually our lead member being shown around the energy centre when we launched that. This scheme, we've also accessed the pilot phase of the HNIP grant. So we were successful in being awarded £1 million to actually extend this network. So it is connected to another council estate that is nearby. And we're using the existing plant room that was on that second estate as backup gas support for the main network at Marlow Road. And in future, that site will connect to a school and a care home. And then the last site that we're working on is in Leighton, and the image at the bottom is an extract from the London heat map that both Anne-Marie and Simon have talked about. And this is a development site of 3 developments together in Leighton that, again, we are looking to provide and work with the developers to provide a private decentralized heat network, hosted again by one of the first site coming forward, and then working using these planning tools to actually connect the other sites and make sure that there's a fair offer for other people. We're also looking across the borough in terms of our site allocation document under our new local plan. So the work hasn't finished, and we will be looking to scope how we can actually try to see whether we can again facilitate decentralized energy networks in other clusters of sites without the council actually being the provider itself. So conscious of time, there are my contact details, and happy to obviously answer any Q&A when we get to that point. Thank you.
Carolyn, thanks very much indeed. That was really good. And just to underscore for all those people who are receiving the presentation, that's a very unusual approach. The local authority is not actually delivering the district energy network themselves. They're taking much more of a facilitatory role, so that's quite different from other speakers we've heard this morning. So I'd now like to ask Tim Starley-Granger to come and join the stage. And excellent, we've got the media for Tim, and Tim Starley-Granger is the Energy Infrastructure Manager for the London Borough of Haringey, and will talk to us about the mystical world of carbon offsetting deferrals for support business cases for DENS. So I will hand over to Tim.
Yeah, thanks, Simon. Yeah, I'm happy to be here. I am the Energy Infrastructure Manager at Haringey Council, which sits next to Waltham Forest, just to the west in London. And like some of the other local authority presenters, I've got sort of several different hats I wear. I sit in the planning department, but I'm managing the council's delivery of district heating. And why I'm so happy to be here today, I think John Sanderson asked earlier why local authorities have got such a patchwork. I think we don't have enough of these events where we get together and share best practice. And so it's really important for us to take the opportunity today. So what I'm going to do is run through very quickly, some of the ground that's already been covered by others, and then talk specifically about the financial contributions that Haringey uses to support its DEN programme. So we sit in London, so our planning policy is driven by the London Plan to a certain extent. And the London Plan, I'd say, through a process of continuous improvement. It's probably on version 3.3.5 at the moment, and version 4 is impending. And it's changed a lot since it first came in 2004. Some of the key changes I've highlighted here recently, it's moved away from kind of on-site approach. I think the London Plan was leading to lots of on-site networks, initially lots of biomass boilers, then lots of CHP, but only ever serving in a single development. But with changes recently, it's moved away from that. It looks it's encouraging much more strategic networks now, which I think is very important. And the other key thing that we have in London that wasn't covered earlier when Catherine was talking about planning policy is carbon offsetting. So we use powers under the Planning and Energy Act 2008 to set carbon targets above Part L. And then if people fail to achieve those targets, we require an offset. And it's a way of levying financial contributions from schemes. But I think the thing about it, which developers kind of like, is it's formulaic. So they know what they're getting into. Whereas with planning policy, we're seeing how complicated it is from national level to regional to local. But what's not been covered is once you get into the individual negotiation of a planning agreement, it's a very black art, and there's lots of negotiation. Often planning policy has a list of 20 or 30 different things, and it's not financially viable for the development to comply with everything. So you have to work out which things you are going to prioritize in that negotiation. But the carbon offset provides a nice sort of formulaic standard. So this is evolving London Plan. Another key area where London Plan evolved was in the publication of the Sustainable Design SPG in 2014. And I've highlighted back a few key things which changed there, but it's mainly about timing, where it started to recognise some of the timing issues Simon was talking about district heating coming along after a development. And so it talked about, for the first time, using communal gas boilers on site instead of an on-site low carbon solution, and deferring some of the investment until later, which is one of the key things we do with our financial contributions. And then, I am not scrolling. There we go. Yeah, then we've got the new London Plan, which is kind of version 4, and it's changing slightly. It's still very similar. One big step is the carbon offset prices changing from £60 a tonne to £95 a tonne. And it's also got this more detailed map of heat network zones, and Anne-Marie showed how that was getting improved by the GLA as we are speaking. So that map on the left is going to change slightly, but there are specific areas where heat network zones are in place. Then kind of a practical application in Haringey. So in Haringey, we've got our evidence base is based on our decentralised energy master plan from 2016, and the map on the right shows a key figure. Basically, there's an energy from waste plant just over the border to the north in Enfield, and we can see a network, big strategic network, growing, covering most of the borough of Haringey, joining up to Waltham Forest to the east and heading down to Hackney to the south. And with that evidence base in place, showing that the most affordable way of decarbonising heat in the borough was through a strategic network, we've managed to move ahead on a number of other planning policies. So within our local plan, we've got a policy, Development Management Policy 22, which sets out more detailed maps. So we've got these sort of 3 key growth areas in the borough where probably 90% of the developments are occurring in those areas, and that's where we think our heat networks will be. And using HNDU funding, we've looked at CHP schemes in each of those areas. It looked viable. So within our planning policy, we've got these purple areas where everyone developing in those areas must be heat network ready and prepared to connect. And then in the pale blue areas, it's only much bigger schemes. So schemes are referable to the mayor, which tend to be very large. But there's some clear guidance to developers about where we expect them to be able to connect. It's also worth saying this dates back a bit to 2016. So like some of the other people, our planning policies evolving slowly. When this was put in place, the energy from waste plant was 10 years away. Now we're almost in 2021. It's 5 years away. Things have moved on a bit. And so in our next slide, we've now got a kind of vision for connecting to the energy from waste plant sooner. So of those 3 schemes that were on the previous map, one of them has got an approved business case. The other 2 business cases are working their way through the council at the moment, with us planning to connect to the energy from waste plant. There'll be heat on in those 3 schemes in maybe 2024, and then we'll connect to the energy from waste plant a couple of years later. So the timing's clearly changed, but also the council's commitment to it has moved on as well. So these are not kind of twinkle in the eye networks anymore. They're still planned networks, but they're starting to get much closer to delivery, and that's really important. So zooming in a bit, so this is the heart of one of those schemes where I've highlighted the developments which are currently more or less on site. And what we saw when these schemes were coming in for planning in 2016, 2017 was all the developers were suggesting small CHP on site. So there were 4 developers, 7 planning applications, 10 CHPs. And they all achieved the magic 35% reduction on site, which is the GLA minimum. They might get 35.2. They don't really push beyond it. The CHP in these schemes was all oversized. It wasn't cost effective to operate. There was no electricity customer. It was not very well thought through, and we didn't think the CHP was likely to operate in the way they were telling us it would. It was also around about this time that the London plan changed to avoid CHP in developments of below 500 homes, and none of these developments has got 500 homes in, so we were able to push back a bit. And so what we did, only one of the sites got approved with CHP. Because then these sites were the next ones that came forward, and our approach was evolving. But we persuaded the developers there to omit the CHP, which meant the carbon performance got worse and the carbon offset went up, but it generally balanced out to the developer. There's a capital cost saving on the CHP, but a compliance cost increase from the carbon offset. They're running on gas boilers only, in line with the GLA's SPD from 2014. We still achieve a small carbon reduction on site, and we require them to offset the other 90%. And in terms of being district heating ready, they've been required to put a pipe to the boundary and allow space for a future substation and a 50k connection charge to fund that substation which doesn't fund all of the cost of the substation, which is interesting. But the green sites is the more recent planning applications there. We moved on a bit. This is where we introduced the kind of delayed offset idea. So it's basically as above, but instead of simply increasing the carbon offset, what we did is we put the carbon offset, we deferred it, and worked out if they connected to the DEN, so that's what we call our district heating and having a decentralized energy network. So if they connect to the DEN, they would pay a connection charge, so that carbon offset money would go directly to the DEN rather than going to the council, enter its offset fund. And this is worth about £1,500 per dwelling. And we've got some conditionality in our section 106s so that if they don't connect to the DEN, and we will allow a 10-year window, then they will just pay the carbon offset. And actually, in some other schemes away from Tottenham Hale, which are a bit bigger, there's an alternative fallback proposition where they would put in a local heat pump or something instead. But yeah, this is essentially what we're doing is we're leaving the developer no worse off, but we're providing funds that will go directly to the district heating. And in terms of the impact, so this scheme here is our first phase of the expansion from Enfield. So there's a pipe to the north, about a 2-kilometre pipe up to Enfield as well as this. There's about 3,000 homes here we're hoping to connect, and it's a £26.5 million scheme. We've got connection charges agreed in planning our Section 106 agreements for £4.5 million. That's because we changed our approach halfway through. If we'd used this deferred offset all the way through, we would have had £6.5 million. And if we hadn't used it at all, we would have had £2.5 million. So there's still a funding gap here, and we've applied for HNIP. But our HNIP cost effectiveness would have been worse. So we would have had to ask for £9.5 million instead of £7.5 million, and that would not have helped the chances of success for our application. And so, in conclusion, what we've done, so we've used existing planning policy to create these pseudo heat network zones, and we've used the Planning and Energy Act carbon offset to have standardised connection charges. And all it does is it redirects developer contributions from the carbon offset fund to the heat network. And the reason why we've done that is if it goes into the carbon offset fund, we've then got to fight with all of the other good projects around the borough for it to be allocated to the heat network. Don't want to have to do that. We'd like it to be going to the heat network. If the payment comes directly to the heat network instead of going to the council and then to the heat network, then it helps with state aid. And there's something called Regulation 123 in the SIL regulations, which we were trying to address at the time. It's been withdrawn earlier this year, but between 2015 and 2019, you were not allowed to use Section 106 for more than 5 developments to fund a particular piece of infrastructure. And we had more than 5 developments in Tottenham Hale, so we would not have been able to collect direct contributions to heat networks from them. So we found a way around that. That's now a bit moot, but it's still beneficial. What we don't have, though, we still don't have a true heat network zone. So whilst we can mandate connection, we can't mandate purchase of energy, and we don't have associated mandated energy charges. We can only require connection if it's viable. So the National Planning Policy Framework requires local authorities to get developments to connect to heat networks where it's viable. Because that's where our push comes from. In our Section 106 agreements, we've got agreements that developers will connect if it's viable, but there's still a negotiation over what's viable. But the key thing is this helps make the network viable. By giving a £4 million swing towards the network, our base project returns increase. You can see the increase there. So without these contributions, we'd be around 2.3%. With the £60 per tonne, we would be at 3.7%. And with the new London Plan carbon offset value of £95 per tonne, we'd be at 4.8%, which is starting to get relatively healthy. I think if you had the added regulatory powers around mandated connection, so you weren't worried about connection risk, and you had this income from the carbon offset fund, you're starting to get to schemes which meet Ken's target of being self-sustaining, self-sustaining heat network market. So yeah, we think what we're doing is quite useful. And I said before, it relies on the Planning and Energy Act 2008, which is under threat in the Future Home Standard. One of the questions was around withdrawing local authority powers to set these targets. And within the proposed changes to the planning system, there's talk about scrapping the Planning and Energy Act as well. We quite like it, and it makes quite a big difference to heat networks, so we'd like it to stay. And that is all I want to say.
Indeed, Tim, that was a very interesting presentation. I see there's already one question for you in the slides. We want to be having a think about that whilst Gideon's making his presentation. So if I can ask you to leave the stage and invite Gideon on and uploading Gideon's media. And all that works perfectly seamlessly. So Tim, if you want to head off, just with that cross at the top right hand corner of your video. Perfect, excellent. Okay, Gideon, I will hand over to you to talk to us about a pretty detailed and how are things actually working in Barking. So over to you, Gideon.
Thank you very much, Simon. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Gideon. I am the Interim Ops Manager for BND Energy at Barking and Dagenham. Before we start, I realize that I'm conscious I'm speaking last, so if you don't listen to much else, the main takeaway of this whole presentation is that timing is extremely important, and that just means two things. It's engage with developers very early and engage with them often. So that's the main takeaway from this presentation. So who is BND Energy? So we are a ESCO, we are not a utility company. Our focus is on delivering local energy schemes requiring new energy infrastructure to supply residents and business across the borough with energy at fair prices, but also delivering a fair level of return to the council. This has been set up in June 2016, and we are seeking to combine public sector leadership with private sector commercial expertise and social values of voluntary sector. To put that into context, although as a private company we keep a firm eye on the profits that we make, but we also focus on trying to save money for our customers and residents. And there's also, I guess, a certain way that we handle, for example, non-paying customers, which might be slightly different than a private company should. That's just the context, given that we belong to a council. Sorry, I'm just getting the slides ready. Excellent. So in 2015, there was an exercise to heat map the whole borough to see which public buildings and development sites would be able to plug onto a district heating system. We identified 7 district energy opportunity areas, and at that time, the initial potential was over 65 gigawatt of heat cells. The largest one of those are now being progressed, which is Barking Town Centre. And before that, we had a pilot scheme in Becontree that linked various development sites. This is the second largest opportunity area, and late in 2016, BEIS opened their heat network, HNIP, for those of us here, pilot for applications, and we applied and won £1.1 million in early 2017. The scheme delivered to core customers is 170 countryside properties, and we also supply the Becontree Leisure Centre with heat. However, initially, these were 3 countryside development sites in separate locations, and Countryside initially approached the project using local indwelling solutions, which we then made work by, sorry, I'm just looking at two different sets of slides, which is why I'm struggling a bit. Yes, so the council uses responsibility with Countryside and the GLA through the development and the planning process to drive a planning permission being submitted by Countryside on the basis of a heat network connecting all three sites. Focus here was just to work really collaboratively with the council and their planning department, as well as the developer. The focus is really to help the developer make this planning application work. And it's important that they understood the benefits of doing so from the beginning. BND Energy developed the energy center and the area-wide network, and then Countryside paid a connection charge to BND Energy to connect their three sites onto the single scheme. We set so the incentive for the developer to connect is that we set our connection charge to be broadly equal to what it would have cost them to develop the infrastructure on site themselves. So it's cost neutral. This resulted in a scheme which can later be expanded to attach future development to also. And often it might be the case that the developer will resist, but we use all possible planning and relationship levers to kind of help them understand that it is to benefit for them to also connect onto us. One thing that is worth noting is that we see climate change emergencies being declared by many councils. There's almost no point in doing so unless you have the correct parties involved to stand behind them. And that can be from a planning perspective. Of course, the planning department has to be behind that and support it, but also politically. So in Barking and Dagenham, we are very fortunate that the senior political leadership, it is a real priority for them to be the green capital of the capital. And we've had support from the leader himself in making this happen, which is, I'm not sure whether that is true for all other councils. Then moving on to Barking Town Centre. The core scheme is made up of 15 different sites across Barking Town Centre, but it's very condensed as we can connect all of those onto 2 kilometers of primary network. There's existing energy centre at Gascoigne used to deliver initial supplies. And this is critical to meet those early phase heat loads, because obviously these 15 development sites, they come on over a long period of time, and there are some of those that are coming on quite soon. The technology that we are using is we've agreed with the GLA and they've granted us with what is called a strategically significant network, and that allows us to come under the SAP 12 rules. And what that basically means is we have the lifespan of those CHPs, which is 15 years, to implement low carbon solutions as a replacement. And we are already trying to do that much earlier, of course, and looking at waste heat from several sources within the borough to do so. The energy generation in that energy centre will be 2 1.5 megawatt CHPs and 27 megawatt backup and top-up boilers. And this is supported by a grant from HNIP. Of those 15 sites, many are under council control, but many are also private developers. And the later ones seeking planning permission recently or moving forward will be captured by planning policies that drive network connections. However, some are working from old planning permissions, and that is where it becomes a little bit difficult. One key site in particular is that their energy strategy made it very clear that they had to connect under, like we've heard in many of the other presentations, Section 106 agreement. But it is very, very important to remind developers of this often. On here on the right, you see that box at the top. You might not be able to read it, but one thing that we have with our planning department now is on the planning website, it is very clear that we have networks in the borough that there's obligation to connect to. But also more importantly is that when you are a developer and you develop a scheme that is big enough to maybe serve as a catalyst for a new scheme, then it is important that they come to talk to us. So again, going back to the theme of speaking to people or speaking to developers as early as possible, we've got it out there on the planning website that developers need to speak to us when they are planning to do new developments in the borough. Then, as far as enacting legal obligations are concerned, the site that I was mentioning was already being constructed when we conceived our scheme, and all we had to rely on was those few short sentences under condition 48 of the Section 106 agreement. And we are still on a journey to connect with these, but we are getting there. And some of the obstacles worth mentioning is that the site had now been sold by the developer to a new owner. Fortunately, they are facilitating some of those conversations that you need to have with the new owner. And there's a pipe connection that was being installed to the site boundary. But of course, we have some concerns about the quality that is installed to. And again, this kind of goes back to early and often is we're working with our consulting engineers to go and inspect that work as early and as often as possible, just to mitigate any risks of quality. On-site energy center was progressed with a very small scale CHP to meet planning obligations. And the problem that caused is that there's no space now in that substation for us to put the thermal substation skid in. And unfortunately, we will have to remove that to install that with the heat exchanger. But that is, again, is just a hiccup because of where we are and them having the connecting, being one of the earlier connectors. And then the developer, the one that sold the site, was definitely at the start not open to these connections. There were delays, but we've managed to work through those and are at a point now where we are ready to sign a connection supply agreement. And then lastly, a couple of lessons that we've learned. Ensure that you have plans of networks drawn up and communicated with the developers as early as possible. It just makes a document very, very clear, and it's difficult then for developers to walk away from that and claim that they were not aware of the obligation to connect. Ensure Section 106 wording is sufficiently developed, and at all possible levels, you have to remind the developers of those obligations to connect. You will have to be very resilient to the inbuilt desire of developers not connecting, especially when they are mid-build and reaching the end of their build. But you must also still be prepared to think flexibly and keep them at the table. We've seen through our communications and relationship with a specific developer, you need to remain open to respond to the objections and negative points that they might bring to the table. For example, we had to agree some advance funding to resolve a building timeline issue around a pipe that needed to go into the ground before landscaping started. And there needs to be a little bit of flex to meet the developers halfway when these really practical issues come along. In the end, you are working with a commercial private developer. They might have reservations about working with a public body, and as the ESCO that sits in the middle, it is about crossing that bridge and putting their minds at ease. It's also important to have a clear and simple market norms offer, which is difficult for them to reject and easy to understand, because they will be putting it in front of investors and maybe different third parties and being able to make the case of why it's beneficial for them to connect onto the district heating system. And then lastly, it's important to engage public planning colleagues, senior officers, and often even politicians. And as it is with councils, as it is with big organizations with multiple departments, it is often the information that you gather from talking to developers. For example, if they have multiple developments in the borough, is making planning colleagues, senior officers, politicians aware of that. Something that we had in a situation where we had in Barking was that we had to just mention it to the leader, and when he spoke to them, he kind of raised it as the need to connect to the district heating system was raised as a priority in that meeting, and that obviously lifted a roadblock for us going forward. And then just lastly, before we move on to any questions, BND Energy is currently recruiting for a general manager. When we were scoping this role, it was a discussion whether it should be a general manager role or a managing director role. We went for general manager, given that it is a very hands-on role, but there's loads of scope to influence how the business will be run and shape the future of BND Energy. And I will post a link to that in the chat. Thank you very much.
Gideon, Carolyn, if you're still available, and particularly Tim, I see there's been a number of questions. Would you mind rejoining us on this stage? So thanks very much. Tim, if you're around.
Yeah,
so, hi. So there's been some interesting questions. So hopefully you've had a chance to read them, Tim. They're predominantly from you. So Carolyn and Gideon stand down, I think, although Gideon is definitely one for you. If you look in the questions, Gideon. So the first one from Chris. Tim, can you explain the logic to swapping from biomass to gas and from CHP to gas-fired only, please?
Yeah, I mean, that's not quite the end of the chain. We're aiming to set up a strategic network connecting to an energy from waste plant serving 60,000 odd homes. And none of those other technologies can really do that. There's not going to be 100 biomass boilers in the middle of London for air quality reasons. And with lots of small CHP, I think there's probably economic reasons why the CHP is often a white elephant and doesn't run. It doesn't deliver the carbon savings. It also doesn't deliver a long-term decarbonisation strategy. So our preference is the strategic network. It's been shown to be more economically achievable. There's maybe a short-term pain for people who may be running on gas boilers for a couple of years until that energy from waste plant can be connected. But we think that's a price worth paying for the long-term strategic benefit.
Okay, no worries. I don't know whether Tim or Gideon possibly, or maybe even Carolyn, want to talk about hydrogen and future-proofing for hydrogen in boiler plants, or whether anybody feels that's not something they can respond to at the moment. I mean, from my perspective, there isn't that infrastructure in place currently within London to warrant that. I mean, certainly when I've been discussing with Simon White previously, he's been from the GLA, he's been talking about bringing hydrogen in at strategic points. I'm not aware of anybody on an individual site-by-site basis proofing for hydrogen burn now. No. Gideon, anything?
I think one thing worth mentioning is obviously when these models are put together, it plans for infrastructure, both boilers and CHPs, to go in relatively quickly. But to make allowances for hydrogen or any other technology, or maybe connecting to waste heat, is where we are now in the detail and knowing when these schemes are on. We might put in we might put in kits a little bit slower, kind of phase it, so that if we put in, say, 2 or 3 CHPs, we might put in 1 and then wait until we put the second and the third one in, which allows us to at least explore other forms of technology right up to the point when we need that extra piece of kit. So it's about the phasing of infrastructure installation.
Okay, no, that makes perfect sense. Thinking about the future, but dealing with the present when you have to. Gideon, I'll ask the one that Chris has put in the chat, and while I'm doing that, Tim, would you mind looking? Sorry, in the questions, Tim, would you mind looking at in the chat, because George has posted a question which I think relates to yourself. So Gideon, the question from Chris Moore was about negative developer behaviour. What if there's is there an economic penalty? If there's not an economic penalty, what do you think the developer? Why do you think the developers are not as engaged as they could or should be? Is that possibly due to the fact that it's not their core business and they're kind of focused on their development and getting things built? What do you put that down to?
I think there's maybe a built-in reluctance from a private developer that wants to get things done quickly, and they are obviously on the deadline because people are moving in a year or two, and not necessarily feeling that they're putting themselves at risk, being at the mercy of a publicly owned district heating system having heat at the door on time. I think that is the main concern, and then being associated with the kind of necessary pain of planning that they have to go through to get that done, which is why I said if in a ESCO you can do as much as you can to bridge that gap between the developer and planning and help them navigate this as much as they can, at least as far as the heating system is concerned, then you're adding value, and I think that sentiment normally changes.
No, absolutely. And Caroline, not to put you on the spot, but just thinking about that in reference with the developments in Waltham Forest, would you agree that having that ESCO there when you're trying to connect multiple developers onto a scheme eases the journey, as opposed to one where you're trying to get developers to connect together, but there isn't actually an ESCO in place who can act as that initial early glue? Does that make sense, Caroline?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. It would have been very difficult, if not nigh impossible, to have moved forward the Black Horse Lane. I don't think having that the ESCO there, having the term sheet, for everybody to be able to see that the offer was fair, that really did help move things forward. And as I said in the presentation section, having the enlarged energy centre on the first site, so it was reality, I think that really helped drive it forward as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So a common theme, whether it's a public or a private sector ESCO, it's good to have that ESCO in place to act as that glue to stick people together. So Tim, as you've had a couple of minutes, can I ask you to respond to George's intriguing question in the chat, please?
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe George has got slightly the end of the stick, but it is a nuanced stick. So I spent more time over the last 3 or 4 years arguing to get gas CHP out than I've been striking agreements to get it in. But we might still look to use gas CHP at a kind of strategic level. So a bit more like Gideon's talking about having a big CHP serving hundreds of homes rather than individual CHP on each level. So we'd like to keep that in our back pocket. In case, in terms of the build out of the energy from waste plant with the proper low carbon heat, there's a 10-year delay until we can get the low carbon heat to a particular area. And we might want, for strategic reasons, to start building a big network, and it will stack up with CHP economically now, but it won't stack up with a heat pump now. And so I think there's also, we see quite a lot of schemes coming forward now with individual heat pumps on a development scale, and again I think I try and argue against that because we've got the strategic vision, but also because of the economics of that heat pump. The energy strategy is saying it's going to magically supply exactly enough of the heat to hit the 35% carbon reduction target, but no one's looked at the price of that heat, and it's almost always a heat pump sitting next to a gas boiler, which is cheaper to run. And just like I've seen with CHP and biomass boilers in the past, the low carbon plant can turn into a white elephant. And so we kind of use economic arguments and not just the the carbon strategy, which drives people often in the wrong direction. It's not just that the energy is going to be more expensive, it's also often the plant is oversized and won't work. So
okay.
does that answer George's question?
George has responded in the chat that it has, but there's an interesting sort of second part to his question, which is that some of his more forward-thinking developers, to get them to expect that low carbon DH from energy from waste will always stay lower than heat from in-building air source heat pumps over the long term. Any thoughts on that one, Tim, or work in progress?
No, I tend to say an EFW is effectively a heat pump. Yeah, you sacrifice electricity to produce heat. It's just like consuming electricity to produce heat. But the Z factor of an EFW is somewhere between 5 and 6 probably, and that's the same as your COP of a heat pump. Okay, you've got distribution losses in the waste heat network, but it's still going to be lower carbon than an on-site air source heat pump for the foreseeable future.
Okay, no, absolutely fair point and well responded. So thanks very much. So thanks very much to all the speakers today. A big virtual round of applause for anybody, particularly in this final session, Gideon, Carolyn, and Tim. So if you're happy to head off to the sumptuous green room with all those snacks that we've virtually laid on for you, I will just a few closing words and complete the conference. Thanks very much, Tim. Thanks, Gideon. So finally, just from me, some closing words. Thanks very much for the chat. Thanks very much for the feedback. And thanks very much indeed for taking the time to attend the conference today. And hopefully you'll be able to join us next year in 2021 in a real event, and we'll all be doing lots of networking during and post the conference. If you've got any thoughts about the speakers today, any questions for them post the event, please do send those in. You're all linked together via the UKDEA, and we'll make sure that the speakers receive those questions. So thanks very much indeed. And Tom, if you'd like to stop the conference, we'll hopefully see you in person in 2021, and happy Christmas. Thank you very much.